This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning to you. I hope that you are well. I do like autumn. Sorry to go all partridge at the very top of the show, but isn't autumn great? Don't at me to tell me about all the slippy pavements and the downsides of autumn, but is it the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness? It is, isn't it? That's what John Keats called it, the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness. There you go, you can have that one for free today. We are in the middle of the season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, and I'm here for it. How do we do this? I think the question at the end of my interminable ramblings will be a very, very, very simple one, and a slightly surprising one given the relative immaturity of the current government, the relative youth, if you like, or the shortness of time with which they have had opportunity to perform. But I think I'm probably, unless I talk myself out of it in the course of the next 10 minutes, which is perfectly possible, I think I'm probably going to ask you at the end of this introduction whether or not you would like Keir Starmer to be replaced by another, or W Streeting, most obviously. And I'm a little bit surprised that I'm asking you that question. Not by events, dear boy, but simply by the calendar. I'm a little bit surprised that the size of the majority, albeit a wide but shallow, a loveless majority, as one excellent journalist called it. And of course the fact they haven't even been in the job for 2 years yet. But, you know, this is a particularly febrile period of politics. So I also recognise that some people think that the conversation about Keir Starmer's leadership is evidence of things that they already believed to be true. And I don't like these mornings, or I don't like this bit of these mornings. I love political conversations about the unprovable, but I don't like the bit where I have to sort of patronise people who think that they understand things. So I can sort of use social media as a dipstick to get the level of confusion and often quite angry ignorance that's out there. And I know that will upset some people, but I'm sorry. It's just true that this is not a conversation about Keir Starmer's leadership that has been prompted by Rupert Murdoch, social media chatter, enemies of the Labour movement, or people who don't understand either the size of the majority or the scale of the successes that the current government has introduced. This is a conversation that has been started by Downing Street. I'm going to have to say that again, because it's not, any more frustrating than dealing with ignorance from the other side of the political divide. But there's something about leftish self-satisfaction that can be particularly impenetrable. I am right and I will not brook any opposition or any challenge to that position. This conversation about Keir Starmer's leadership and the fact that Wes Streeting is the perceived focus of the perceived challenge to his leadership is a direct consequence of number 10, somebody in number 10 Downing Street briefing very senior political journalists about how hard they are working to protect Keir Starmer from a leadership challenge. That is a matter of fact, not a matter of opinion, not a matter of legacy media, not a matter of social media chit-chat. It is a matter of fact. The story has its roots smack in the middle of Keir Starmer's Downing Street. That is why this story is in the news. So we can park immediately, and I probably shouldn't do this because, telling people not to ring into the programme is a very odd way of encouraging people to ring into the programme, but there is no point us picking over the carcass of a non-existent corpse. This is not a story about any of the things that self-appointed experts think it might be about. It's a story about Downing Street growing increasingly concerned over speculation among its own MPs that Wes Streeting could be planning an imminent coup against Starmer. And that is what they have briefed senior political journalists of. So, could you explain to me how his position could possibly be under threat with the majority? Yes, of course I can. It's because a majority is made up of people. It is made up of human beings. And those human beings have given Downing Street serious cause for concern that they're reaching the end of the road when it comes to their previously rock-solid support for Keir Starmer. And whether or not it is fair or unfair is a question for the angels. The point is, it is what is now believed, and therefore the conversation is now following the course that it is following. Forgive me if I sound a little petulant, but I find it a lot easier to deal with people who kind of know that they're stupid and love to pretend otherwise, rather than people who think that they're clever when they're not. So that is the story here. And it's important to understand that before we get stuck into the phone-in that we are now going to have in a much more friendly, warm and measured tone. 8 minutes after 10 is the time. Make me a list. Someone always does, actually. I think his name is Richard, and I'm very grateful to you, Richard, for the long list you send me every time we point out how unpopular Keir Starmer is, of all the things that Keir Starmer has done. But his unpopularity cannot be ignored. I think he is, by some measures, even more unpopular than Liz Truss, which is spectacularly unfair, but true. And it's the truth of it, of course, that will be concerning Labour MPs. Wondering about the wisdom of him continuing in the job. The truth of the unpopularity, not the fairness of the unpopularity. Then you make the list. You point at things like the winter fuel misstep, which continues to haunt them. And here you can obviously acknowledge that missteps and mistakes made by a Labour government in our corrupt media ecosystem are going to be amplified and embellished and repeated in ways that mistakes made by right-wing politicians or conservative governments are simply not. The idea that Keir Starmer stands in any way comparison with Boris Johnson, the corrupt, morally and, I suppose intellectually and even legally corrupt regime of Boris Johnson is a million miles away from where Keir Starmer is. And yes, the media is a magnifying glass that will hugely, hugely, hugely enlarge mistakes and missteps made by the Labour government while completely ignoring missteps made by Conservative governments. That too is a matter of fact and a matter of record, but it doesn't change the fact that his own MPs are profoundly worried about his performance in the top job. His own MPs will also, of course, be subject to corrupt media magnification, but it doesn't matter. His own MPs are increasingly of the view that they'll have a better chance of doing well, keeping their seats in the next general election, still a long way off, I grant you, with somebody else in charge. This is not an irretrievable situation. Again, I'm sorry, I'm sounding like a school teacher today, but sometimes even my boundless reservoirs of patience can be somewhat depleted. It is not irretrievable. It's some very strange places, from Goldman Sachs to the Daily Telegraph, have started pointing out that signs of recovery, economically speaking, are becoming unignorable, even as the job numbers must have sent a shiver down Rachel Reeves's spine yesterday. But this is not irretrievable. If the media persists in making everything in this country about small boats, then the challenge becomes harder. But if it actually remembers to look at other issues and measure other issues, the situation is not irretrievable. But I don't think Keir Starmer is going to change his spots anytime soon. So on one side of this issue, you have the political performance, the policy decisions, the failures to communicate, the things over which you have quite a lot of control and which is not currently being exercised very effectively. On the other side, you have him. And whether you like it or not, this is the nature of parliamentary politics. It's the nature of British politics. It's probably been the nature of politics since television was invented and Harold Wilson pretended that he smoked a pipe because it looked good on the telly, when actually in private that was not his tobacco ingestion means of choice. It matters. It really matters. And he's not going to change. Those of us who welcomed boredom, those of us who wanted relatively dull leadership, had another word attached to dull, even if we never said it out loud, and that word was competent. Dull competence. Please, God, for a period of dull competence. The lobby, Westminster journalists, political journalists, are addicted to drama and fever pitch coverage. It drives me potty some of the time. It really does. It's so draining and so unnecessary and so unreflective of reality. You know, the fine detail of Rachel Reeves's rental agreements with tenants that she'd never met being front page news for days. It's just a little bit sad. It's a bit childish. But sometimes the attention devoted to a story that appears to be a little bit manufactured is true. And it's real. This is a real story about the people around Keir Starmer being really worried about his position. And that is the starting point for our conversation this morning. The people around Keir Starmer are really worried about his position. They feel it is under genuine threat from Labour MP dissatisfaction. Now, Wes Streeting was probably telling the truth this morning when he distanced himself from all of this chatter, because what happens is that the level of dissatisfaction among MPs reaches a point that the current leader's position becomes fragile, and at that point you start looking around for alternatives, and the top of the list at the moment for many people will be the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. The story suits him down to the ground as well in many ways, because he's about to make 15 or something thousand people in the NHS redundant, which is unlikely to go down well with the membership either, or with the parliamentary party either. But I don't think he is actually on manoeuvres. I just think his is the name that pops up on the fruit machine when Labour MPs, increasingly unhappy with Keir Starmer, pop 20p in the slot and pull the lever. All of that, I think, is pretty close to gospel. I think that is a pretty comprehensive, objective analysis of what is going on. And I'm sorry if you were subscribing to the idea that that having this conversation plays into the narrative of manipulation, because I'm not going to call you stupid. I'm just going to call you very mistaken today, and that's fine. I get paid to do this, you don't. That is what is going on. The people around Keir Starmer are very worried about the unpopularity he now enjoys among his own MPs, who would the next stage in this process, history has taught us, the next stage in this process would be to start gathering around somebody else, almost certainly, in the first instance, Wes Streeting. But remember, he who wields the dagger rarely wears the crown. So another reason why Wes Streeting is saying the things that he is saying today is that you don't want to be caught with the instrument of assassination in your hand. You may be a sort of, what the best way to play it is to do it through a reluctant sense of duty. My party has called and I must answer. If you're trying to make that position, my party has summoned me and I must answer their call with a stout heart and an honest approach. You don't want to have a metaphorically blood-soaked dagger hidden behind your back, which you've just removed from the back of your predecessor. So there it is as well. But none of this changes the central question, does it? A loveless landslide was the phrase, of course, not a loveless majority. Forgive me for that. I'm normally such a big fan of alliteration. I don't think, I mean, look, I always do this, and I think it works. If it gets on your nerves, again, I'm sorry. But there are two ways into it, isn't there? There's the personal, and then there's the overview. There's the little picture, and then there's the big picture. I think they're really hard to separate. I think the question I'm going to ask you today, and it's really crazy that we're asking it in before the middle of November 2025. Do you want Starmer to go? 0345 6060 Do you want him to go now or soon? And if so, why? And if not, why not? As I say, it's not irretrievable. 0345 6060 give me a call and simply tell me whether or not you want Starmer to go. Because again, and I'm not going to labour this point, pardon the pun, unduly, at least I'm going to try not to, but this is a story about his closest allies being worried that he's vulnerable. That's what the story is about. So the question of how vulnerable he is across the country as opposed to the parliamentary party is one that only we can answer. Do you think he's blown it? Do you think he's already blown it? 0345 6060 973. Okay? And if you don't want to get stuck into the personal, if you want to do the bigger picture, it speaks to exactly the same issue, really. But why is he so unpopular? Why is he so unpopular? And listen, this is obviously a conversation for people who are not persuaded by the sort of nativist lies of populists. This is a conversation for people, most obviously, for people who voted Labour at the last general election. In fact, I mean, almost exclusively, in the first instance, if you voted for him last time and you think he's already blown it, has he let you down? I'm not interested in talking to various sort of freak bats and psychos about how the latest online conspiracy about how he's a tool of the World Economic Forum who has backed the injections of vaccines in order to control all our minds. There's plenty of radio shows you can ring. This ain't one of them. So it's for people who had some optimism, however guarded, after the last general election, who don't have any, much or enough left. But please also tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me that the situation is not just retrievable, but absolutely not bad enough for the fears being expressed in Downing Street to be realised. That's it, I think. 0345 60609 at 73. On a personal level, has he blown it? For you, has he lost your vote already? Do you want him to go? And on a second level, to make it a little bit bigger, a little bit broader, why is he so unpopular, so personally unpopular? Because I just find that extraordinary. I'm not suggesting I sign up or accept the chairmanship of his fan club, but to be so spectacularly unpopular when, at the very worst, he's made mistakes is, frankly, extraordinary. But it's true. And there must be reasons behind it. And no one is better placed to tell me what they are than you. It's 20 minutes after 10. Hit the numbers now. You will get through.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 21 minutes after 10, and number 10 is on alert amid fears of a challenge to leadership. That is a story that has come straight out of number 10. And it makes me wonder how justified those fears are among the electorate as opposed to among the Parliamentary Labour Party. And, of course, by electorate, I chiefly mean the people who elected Keir Starmer. You gave him your vote, and you don't necessarily want it back, but you wouldn't be entirely averse to a change of personnel at the top of the pyramid. Phil's in Exeter. Phil, what do you reckon?
Hello, James.
Hello,
a second-time caller, I'm pleased to say.
I wonder when you can stop keeping count. I don't want you to ring in next year and say 17th time caller, Phil. I think
if I can get through, maybe.
If you can get through. Carry on.
James, I'll make it clear now. I'm a Labour activist here in sunny Exeter. I knock a lot of doors. I speak to a lot of people. People wanted the change. Mm-hmm. Change has been announced at national level, and there's some great things. For example, I worked hard to try to renationalise the railways. Guess what? We're doing it after 30 years. We're bringing back we're doing all these things. We're making all these announcements. But when I knock a door, people still say to me, Phil, when I open the door, I still see the weeds. I still see the potholes. The bus don't turn up. The trains are delayed. I haven't had a decent pay rise. I know they say average, but you know, I've got longer hours. So what's happening is about delivery. Now, changing the manager of a football team don't only, it's the players. It's the players who put the ball in the back of the net, not the manager.
Well, I mean, you know, changing managers generally makes quite a big difference.
Yeah, well, I don't think it will on this occasion.
Okay, so who are the players that are letting us down then?
Well, I think...
As a country?
I don't mean you personally, but the media in general.
Yeah, but that's going to be true for everyone. That's true for every Labour leader.
It. James, you love it. Your class love it. When I say class, I mean the media class.
Yeah, but this is a story about Downing Street. I mean, I knew I was going to have to do this. I didn't think it would be with the first caller. This story is about Downing Street, number 10, briefing political journalists that Keir Starmer is facing a leadership threat and he is determined to fight it. It's come out of your man's lobby. It's come out of his camp. It's come out of his bunker. It's got nothing to do with me. The story didn't exist yesterday. I wouldn't have been doing a phone-in today about threats to Keir Starmer's leadership unless Keir Starmer's leadership team had told us that there were threats to Keir Starmer's leadership. So with the greatest of respect and with apologies for not keeping the patience I promised I was going to keep, you have to park that notion. The British media is bent. It's utterly corrupt. It's entirely in the hands of oligarchs and plutocrats, except for the BBC that is now under attack from the bits of the media owned by the oligarchs and plutocrats. But this story on this day about this issue is coming straight out of Downing Street. So spare me the legacy media claptrap, Phil, please.
Well, I hope I'm not giving claptrap. I mean, it's not...
No, it is a story created by Downing Street, which speaks to the incompetence in that building, not to the corruption of the UK media, which I talk about on this programme every single day.
Okay, give me a chance.
I will.
All I'm going to say is the chattering classes inside the party, outside the... or wherever they are, should stop. We should focus on what we've got to do. We've got to get on. We've got to put things right.
So why is he so spectacularly unpopular among... park the country. Why are so many Labour MPs concerned?
Well, they're concerned for their seats, and I understand that. They're concerned for their jobs and their seats.
Why? Why are they concerned for their jobs and their seats?
Because of the polls. Because the polls are going down.
Why are the polls going down?
Well, because we continually have a poll telling everybody how bad things are in life. It's what we like to talk about in this country.
And whose job is it? Whose job is it to turn that oil tanker around?
Oh, I know there's about leadership. I totally agree to you, but I think we need to play our part individually in that. Look, I'll finish because I see where you're going, and I get it. I understand it.
I salute your loyalty and your optimism, mate.
Thank you.
No, I really do. I really do.
I really appreciate it because I'm working class. I believe in the working class. I think of our struggle. As soon as the left divide, we're finished. That's all we are.
But it's not.
So,
anyway. That's fine. But the problem here is that the story that is being told to the people that you're talking to on the doorsteps, they couldn't even begin to tell you. And respectfully, you can't tell them either. Because if you're sitting there saying, stop worrying about this, that and the other, what you really need to be worrying about is the chattering classes, then you're on a hiding to nothing as well. You need some vision and you need something. And the mad thing is, and we probably would agree on this, Phil, that I think he's capable of it. I've seen glimpses of it. I've seen glimmers of it. I've seen moments where he seems to be embracing it. There are times, but and yes, of course, a Conservative Prime Minister would be given break after break after break by the same media. But it is not, I'm afraid, even debatable that somebody else from the same party in the same job could be doing lots and lots of things better. That's the thing that I think you're struggling with, mate. Somebody else from the same party, with the same policy platform, perhaps, in the same job, would be doing a lot of things a lot better. Most obviously, perhaps, engaging, inspiring, telling a story. Andrea is in Launceston in Cornwall. Andrea, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm a first-time caller. Been listening for a while.
Well, welcome aboard. There's a lot at the moment. There must be something in the air. Must be something in the waters. What would you like to say?
So I've given this some thought, actually.
I'll never catch on.
I think there is a basic issue these days with politics generally. So first of all, I don't want to see Keir Starmer gone, okay? But I think I
don't think I do, for the record.
No,
I should probably have made that a bit clearer from the outset. I think the situation is retrievable, but I completely understand why the conversation has gone where it's gone today.
Well, I think there is a basic issue right now. We have become addicted to TV personality politics. The person who comes out and says, I'm going to fix everything, look at me, all singing, all dancing, really good media. These people seem to have a really good media presence and a really good media team. Now, I believe that Keir Starmer is a decent man of character.
So do I.
And so I think character is far more important in politics, and it should be, but it's not right now.
Charisma, not character. And character is hugely important.
Character
They're not the same thing. But is there not? I mean, so let's put the most sort of dishonest populist imaginable over. Oh, that's handy. There's Nigel Farage, and put him on one pole, and then put Keir Starmer pretty close to the other extreme. Is that someone who may well be honest and have character, but who just doesn't tell a story?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the heart of the issue. I think Keir Starmer needs a better media team behind him. He needs to put himself out there and tell
So I'm interrupting everyone today. I'll shut up for a while. No, it's not okay. Carry on.
I came up with this phrase, to coin a phrase. I think we are kind of addicted to immediacy idiocy. Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not brilliant. I'm not nicking it, but it's quite good.
No, don't nick it. Immediacy, idiocy is we want everything now. We want everything today. Okay. So we elected a new government because for the last 14 years, the Conservatives were elected consecutively time and again, and they made a mess of things. So we thought, okay, let's put someone else, nice, shiny person, new person on number 10, and they will fix everything. And then we decided that we wanted everything done immediately and that they would fix everything immediately.
I don't think Labour MPs did. I'm going to argue with everyone today. I can't believe Eleanor's putting through all the people who think Keir Starmer should be given more of a break. And I don't want him to go yet. I think the situation is retrievable. But Labour MPs are unhappy because he's not providing them with anything they can take to the people. They didn't need to do everything. See, what you're doing, you've got sort of, you've got extremity blindness, is that you see, I'm just like teasing you a bit because of your immediacy line. So what you need is somebody who is more compelling than Keir Starmer. You don't need a Boris Johnson or a Nigel Farage. You don't have to go for a grifter, for a narcissist, for a liar, for an obvious charlatan. You just need someone who is like Keir Starmer but better at it. And that's Wes Streeting. That would be the argument.
I think Wes Streeting is a great guy. Every time I see him on TV, I find him quite engaging. I'm not saying that there isn't a better alternative to Keir Starmer. What I'm saying is I think that we are just being a little bit, blind at the moment because there are so many shiny things out there promising so many shiny solutions. Again,
I can agree with everything you say until we come up with the question of what is the antidote to the disease you're describing. And the disease you're describing is real and it's ravaging our country. But the antidote, the best available antidote today does not look like Keir Starmer. That's the problem. That's what the MPs are saying. That's why Downing Street has gone into bunker mentality. And that is partly why the polling is so low, although I think that is, to go back to Phil in Exeter, who I probably monstered a little bit unfairly, for which I apologise. That is why, that is when the media becomes the answer to the question, is why is his polling so spectacularly awful? Answer, media has magnified negativity, so it would have been bad, but the fact that he can't catch a break from all of the people that told you Brexit was going to be brilliant, Boris Johnson was a wonderful man, Liz Truss was an economic genius, austerity was a necessary response to an international banking crisis, all of the people who've lied to you and lied to you and lied to you again in my line of work, attacking Starmer, of course that's a huge contributing factor to why he is so unpopular across the country. But it's a magnifying glass. And you have to have something under the magnifying glass to be magnified. And that's why the Labour MPs are more concerned than you would expect at this point in the parliamentary cycle. Andrea, thank you. And thank you for your patience with my surprisingly short temper this morning. Let's fix that. That's on me. You can fix this. Why? Why is he so unpopular? And has he already run out of road? How close is he to running out of road? Whose side are you on? The people lobbying today to protect his position or the people circling the wagons? 0345 60 60973. Lottie Morley has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Thinking if you made a list of all the chancellors, working backwards from Rachel Reeves, all the chancellors that have delivered a budget, I presume there are people who've held the office but not for long enough to deliver a budget. Oh, Kwasi Kwarteng. I know he did a fiscal event, didn't he? It was a sort of regarded as a budget, but it wasn't a budget. So there you go. There's your pub quiz answer number one. The last chancellor to hold the office but not deliver a budget would probably be Kwasi Kwarteng. But if you had to go through the list of chancellors in recent years who have delivered a budget, then you would be absolutely staggered by how many. The contrast between, say, the last 10 years and the previous 50. You look at some of the personnel changes undertaken because the Tories couldn't arrange a knees up in the proverbial brewery. Number of people that got the Foreign Secretary job, the number of Home Secretaries. You wonder why the Home Office is in complete disarray. Oh, it's all the fault of the Labour Party. It's not the fact that the Tories had 377 different Home Secretaries in the space of 6 weeks. But I'd forgotten about Sajid Javid till his name popped up. That idea that you could name in a pub quiz, how many chancellors can you name who've delivered a budget? But it occurred to me, and of course Sajid Javid probably best known for being my holiday cover on LBC, but I mention it because you don't want changes all the time. It was one of the things that propelled Labour into power, was the idea that the 14 years previously had just seen an incredible acceleration of the revolving door that was Downing Street, the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Treasury, all the rest of it. And yet here we are, having a sensible, I hope, despite my rather short temper, a sensible conversation about whether or not Keir Starmer is in genuine trouble. And the reason why we're having the conversation, and I should stress this again in a slightly less obstreperous fashion, is because Downing Street think he is. It's not because the Daily Mail says he is. It's not because Kemi Badenoch, remember her, says he is. It's not because of this. It's not because of that. It's because Downing Street thinks he is, and that will be a consequence of conversations with Labour MPs. And that is why we're having this conversation today. Essentially, how much trouble is he really in? That's a bit too nebulous for our purposes. So do you think it would be good to replace him, really, is the nicest way to phrase the question. I did forget Nadeem Zahawi. Did he ever do a budget? He didn't, did he? See, you see what I mean? That's what was replaced. How quickly we forget, said someone clever once, probably in a play. How soon we forget, how quickly we forget. Everyone had a go at being Chancellor under the Tories. I mean, literally everybody had a go at being Chancellor. In fact, if you didn't have a go at being Chancellor under the Tories, you're probably Mark Francois. Everybody else got a go. Everybody else got a bite of the cherry. Pretty much everybody got a go at being leader. By the time the needle nudged around to Liz Truss, there must have been people on the back benches going, flip it, maybe I should have thrown my hat into the ring. We're giving it to Liz Truss. So that's why I find the addiction to drama so sort of pointless. Doesn't get me on many Christmas card lists among other people who cover British politics, but they are largely sort of smelling each other's flatulence a lot of the time, and a lot of the fever pitch speculation that blows up all over the place is often built on nothing. Never more so, perhaps, than with the Rachel Reeves rental. Even the Angela Rayner thing was not anywhere near as serious as 10,000 things that the Tories did, but it was, if you're going to try and restore integrity and ethics, it was the right thing to do. She had no choice but to walk the plank. But this is different. This is a story about Starmer's top team worrying about the security of Starmer's position. And I wonder how right they are to be worried. Robert's in York. Robert, what would you like to say?
How are you doing? It's first time calling for myself as well, James.
You're very welcome, Robert. It's fantastic to have you.
Yeah, you got me thinking. I've been listening for quite a number of years, actually. But you got me thinking here, and you got me thinking back a few years. I mean, I think with Starmer, I mean, it's only recently, I think there was some media person described him as the lesser spotted Keir Starmer because he didn't really have that much of a presence, and where was he and things like that. Yeah. But he does appear to be a bit of a quiet, calm, reserved man. I don't think he gets in, anybody or any politician for that matter gets into the job to do a bad job. I think his intentions are there, but I think the actual circus around him and the calamity that's unfolded since he's become Prime Minister has give people opportunity to sort of like jump on him, you know. And I think perhaps the publicity and the way that they put messages out, as you know, in hindsight, has been catastrophic in many ways. I mean, I always think about, you know, looking back to the days of Spitting Image and when we had John Major as Prime Minister, and the way that Spitting Image always portrayed him as such the grey person with no personality and stuff. And I just think, what would Spitting Image portray Keir Starmer as?
Very similar, I suspect.
Do you know what I mean? And
I do,
think that,
yeah.
You know, I was a lifelong member of, I have been a lifelong member of the Labour Party up until quite a few years, about 10 years ago. And I think that for me, the whole political agenda has changed, and it's more. It seems to have become more about a person's personality and the way they hold themselves.
I wonder, and you're not the first person to say this, and I've probably said it myself. I think we may have become a little bit intoxicated by the sort of rise of populism. So Boris Johnson, very good on quiz, very good on game shows, and that somehow got translated into leadership abilities and leadership capabilities. Don't overlook the importance of Brexit in breaking everything. Brexit making lying not just acceptable but downright necessary to political advancement. So I wonder whether the John Major model actually, Robert, does the opposite of what you think it does, and it reminds us that we've always had a bit of a problem with charisma and telegenic.
Well, perhaps you might be right, but I mean, the general feeling I get amongst people is very grey at the moment on the outlook of the world and stuff, and people are perhaps looking for light or some sort of pot of gold at the end of some, not grey rainbow, but multicoloured rainbow. That they want hope, and that's the one thing that they can't take away from people is hope for a better future and stuff, and looking for difference. So, I mean, when you see Starmer on the world stage around the other leaders, he almost is like the guy that doesn't want to be picked for your football team. You know what I mean? When you're picking people out, and he doesn't seem as strong. He doesn't have the character to sort of like take the lead in conversations.
I thought you were going to say the opposite. Then this is why this is such an interesting conveison. I think he's much better on the world stage than he is on the domestic stage.
Well, I just don't see that.
Fair enough.
You're almost. I mean, if Starmer was my son, and I'm nowhere near old enough to be his dad.
Thanks for clarifying that, Robert.
Yeah, you would be willing him to sort of like, come on, get yourself, speak up, man. Get out there and tell people what you really think and what you really mean. But I just don't think it's in his makeup or his build to be able to do that, unfortunately. And I do think his intentions are perhaps there, but there's just been so many calamities.
I mean, how close are you then, if indeed you're not already there, to thinking that a change is as good as a rest?
Well, I think there's far too many cartilaginous individuals around him that would want to jump into his position.
All people. I mean, they say that everybody in Parliament wants to have a tilt at the top job, but the cartilaginous is a great word, Robert.
Yeah. Well, I picked that one. I stole that one from Stephen Fry many years ago.
It's fantastic. I love that. Made of cartilage. So sort of people who are just sort of like sharks.
Gristly.
Jordan Gristly. Big Jordan Gristly. But that's not an answer to the question about, regardless of who might be waiting in the wings, sharpening their cudgels. Given your critique of Keir Starmer, you're going to struggle to persuade me that you think he's the best man for the job.
Well, no, absolutely, and I don't think he is the best man for the job. But then again, I don't know who would be the best person for the job. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of people are probably in that, that thing of limbo. It's like we're living in an episode of Lost. You've gone through years and years of, seasons and seasons of different, parties.
I know, you're right.
And now
I like it.
It's all been a bad dream, and really, we're just in limbo.
Won't someone come along and break the spell? And increasingly, one wonders, you wonder, I wonder, possibly almost all of us wonder, if Keir Starmer's got whatever it is that you need to break this particular spell. I don't know. Robert, it was a great call. Thank you so much. 10:45 is the time. I'll read this just because it made me chuckle from George. You're the biggest Labour supporter going. You think... So this is a conversation about whether the current leader of the Labour Party and Prime Minister should be replaced. With me coming from a position that it is a lot more feasible as a prospect than I would have expected at this point in the electoral cycle. But George is listening to the same programme as you. You're the biggest Labour supporter going. You think you're intellectual because you use a few fancy works words. But remember, mate, you work on a radio station and not a very good one. Oh, thank goodness for George. Do you know, I thought I was back on the shop floor in River Island when I got to work this morning. I completely forgot that I worked for a radio station. Brackets, and not a very good one.
James O'Brien on LBC.
49 is the time. He hasn't let me down, writes Daniel. I'm disappointed with the lack of progress, but he's still better than any of the previous 3 PMs. Can't argue with any of that, but it doesn't mean he's better than the next one. I don't mean that glibly either, but that's why the conversation today that Downing Street has prompted, which is madness when you think about it. Downing Street has created this conversation about threats to Keir Starmer's leadership. Tash writes, I don't want Keir Starmer to go. I think he's doing a good job. I believe he's had unfair treatment by the media. You will never find a Labour politician who doesn't. Even Tony Blair, who ended up godfather to Rupert Murdoch's child, eventually got lynched by them. I don't understand why he's so disliked. He's a decent guy, just getting on with the job. I'm confused as well by the scale of the dislike for him. But of course, this is all post Elon Musk buying Twitter, which has polluted public discourse in ways that it will take historians of the future to properly chronicle. Steve says, no, it's simply too early. We don't need more Westminster chaos. Boring politics is better. We need to get the country into a respectful state that other countries won't laugh at anymore. At least the lying has stopped, but not from the Tories, but not, of course, from Reform. Has it? Honest Bob Jenrick? He doesn't lie straight in bed, Steve. But I take your point about leadership, perhaps. The strategy is wrong. Sir Keir is inherently a good man, says Tim in Stevenage, and has a track record of competence, but his advisors getting him to out-reform reform is the problem. It hemorrhages votes to the centre-left, but gains very little from the right. If anyone should go, it's Glassman. He's the guy perceived as a sort of architect of blue Labour. I don't know that he's got an actual role. He just gets turned to a lot by the media. Well, he's a really good example of the media's contribution to Keir Starmer's problems, as you find this bloke who, I'll tell you how obscure he was. He was one of the 41 people that the Daily Mail identified as proof that clever people support Brexit a few years ago. You read that list. Someone posted the article on Blue Sky yesterday. You read that list. It's like a who's who of people who went on to become unhinged headline writers for the Daily Telegraph. And this Glassman fellow was one of them. He's there. 41 people who prove that clever people support Brexit too. And it is just an absolute potpourri of nincompoops and plonkers. But he was there. And, of course, he's the person you book if you are pretending to be seeking Labour voices to talk about Labour. You book a pro-Brexit fellow who has absolutely nothing to do with the current Labour government. So, he'll probably have a column in the Telegraph and a regular slot on the breakfast show tomorrow. What's that? He already does? 10:51 is the time. So he's not the problem, but everything else you say is valid. And this from Will, which I probably will steal. Keir Starmer is the BBC to Farage's Fox News. That works on all sorts of levels, not least this week, doesn't it? But these are all problems that he has to somehow deal with. And at the moment, even people that like him and want him to stay in the job are wondering how or whether he is going to be able to deal with it. Gregor is in Kilburney. Gregor, what would you like to say?
I do broadly agree with all the text that you've just read, actually.
Okay.
But
all
fundamentally,
of them?
Aspects of them in the sense that I have a huge amount of respect for Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
I believe that he is objectively better than the last three PMs that we've had. But
yeah, I've got a goldfish who would be objectively better than the last three. That may be a bit unfair on Rishi Sunak, but not very.
And he has been treated unfairly, admittedly, but I do not believe that he should be the person to lead the Labour Party into the next election. A bit of context, I guess. I actually became a Labour member in 2016, 2017, and I voted enthusiastically for Keir Starmer to become Labour leader in 2019 because I believe that he would retain the popular aspects of Corbyn's policies without the baggage of the man himself. That was his whole shtick. Yeah. And I feel like I've been continually let down and betrayed since then.
Well, you have. If that is your particular bag of policy dreams, you have been probably let down more than anybody.
I'm not a Corbynite. Corbynite. I believed in many of his policies. Other ones I didn't believe in, certainly when it comes to defence and international relations. I did not agree with those at all. Sure. However, the first red flag for me was something that I've not really seen mentioned too much in discussions around Starmer and the Labour Party, maybe because it's not a big deal to many people, but it's a big deal to me, is in 2022, there were a huge number of protests around land access around England, particularly the legal case over right to wild camp on Dartmoor. And that resulted in a huge campaign, and eventually Starmer came out and said, if Labour are elected, we will bring in a Scottish-style right to roam in England. That was binned a year later. And that to me was the first major red flag, because although there have been so many U-turns, a lot of them, and you yourself have come to the defence of some of them in the sense that they are financially justifiable.
Well, when the facts change, you have to be allowed to change your mind.
Exactly. That the case over dropping right to roam as a headline policy was one which was motivated not by finances in any way, but by lobbying from landowners. And I come from a landowning family, but I do not believe that was an ethical or right decision to make, and it made me feel like he was lacking a kind of backbone or a moral.
It's fascinating listening to you, because that is a very personal perspective, but of course it's as valid as anybody's, isn't it? And that is, for you, that's evidence of a character flaw, not just a political misstep.
Absolutely. I was so enthusiastic. I was genuinely, I moved up from England after the last election, after the 2019 election. I moved back up to Scotland. So obviously I don't necessarily have a personal vested interest in this anymore, but I believe that, free access to land for people is a fundamental way in which we can start to repair our damaged relationship with the environment. And so when Starmer came out and said, we're allowing people back onto the land in England again, I thought, fantastic, what a great step forward. And to see him abandon it for no reason other than lobbying. There are various lobbying groups that have taken personal credit for that decision. I just feel like you can't defend that on the basis of the situation changing, of the facts changing. It speaks to his character, or at the very least the character of the people around him who are the ones making the decisions.
Or, and I'm maybe moving into full sort of Malcolm Tucker territory here, Gregor, so be gentle with me, or it was that thing that we wanted from him when he was carrying the Ming vase across the ice rink, and it was a pragmatic calculation of political utility.
Mm-hmm. I agreed with you at the time. I was listening to you talking about the Ming vase and thinking that this is going to be for the best. This is going to be for the best. But I think the past year, so much has happened, and ultimately, my concern is not bringing a revolutionary into number 10. It's not bringing someone who is going to fundamentally change. I believe there needs to be fundamental change in many aspects, particularly the environment. I don't believe that's going to be number one priority for me at the next election. The number one priority for me at the next election is keeping the far right out.
Yeah, that's his best chance at the moment, is actually the people who will do, in many ways, what they did in 2024 and vote for him to keep the alternatives at bay, as opposed to voting for him. That's why it was a loveless landslide. Voting for him with love, it would just be motivated, as we saw it in Caerphilly, didn't we, in Wales recently, when everyone was sort of taken by surprise. No one more so than Nigel Farage, who was there doing a victory lap until reality bit, and he jumped straight in his car to head back up the M6. But I don't know, it's a bit desperate if that is the best card you've got in your hand, is how many people can see through the hideous facade that Nigel Farage lurks beneath. That is pinning an entire electoral strategy on that, as many people think Morgan McSweeney, Starmer's key advisor, is doing. That seems to me to be very risky. Stephen Bush of the Financial Times. I've got to sneeze. Have I ever sneezed before on the radio? There must be something about... It's gone now. Don't worry, Gregor. You can put your handkerchief away. How many years have I been doing this job? Good Lord, really? I'm due a pay rise. I just really nearly sneezed then. I felt my nose... when your nose starts tingling, there must be something. Why does that's one for Mystery Hour. Why does no one ever sneeze on the radio? Keith, right? One job. Remind me that. I got a question on last week. I don't think anyone answered it, about avocados. I'm going to get a question on this week as well. Why does no one ever sneeze on the radio? Is it because the lights in the studio are so bright? I don't know. It's easy. I probably shouldn't get distracted quite as easily as that. Gregor, thank you. I'm minded currently to rejig the question slightly at the top of the next hour and carry on with this conversation, but I will respect your wishes not to if you contact me in a polite and persuasive fashion. Don't forget, PMQs is on the way at 12 noon today, and Mystery Hour, if you've no idea what I'm talking about, because like so many people, you are relatively new to the programme, Mystery Hour is a bit of a departure every Thursday from 12. If I tell you that it's so exciting, it's spawned its own genuine board game, you'll get an idea of how different it is from the stuff that we normally discuss. But PMQ's on the way at 12 today. I don't know, I haven't got time to squeeze in another caller, and I haven't got any need to sneeze anymore either. So the question remains, my rather ill-tempered explanation at the top of the show of why the conversation about Starmer's leadership is not proof of media conspiracy or Westminster chit-chat or social media leading public discourse. It is proof of, as Stephen Bush of the Financial Times puts it, somebody in Downing Street is clearly having a breakdown. And given that he is one of, if not my favourite, all-time favourite political commentator at the minute, then that is something you should pay attention to. The story has come out of Downing Street, but it speaks to a much broader truth. That is the measurable unpopularity of Keir Starmer and the question of where it comes from and whether you would actually like to see him replaced, which leads also into the question of how does he fix this?
James O'Brien on LBC.
2 minutes after 11 is the time. As you would know, or as you would expect if you're a regular listener to this very awful radio station, copyright George, who's currently having a cup of tea in Idiot's Corner. Nick Abbott sneezes all the time on the radio, doesn't he? I had in the back of my mind, as I said to you, why does no one ever sneeze on the radio? In the back of my mind, I said, someone does. Who is it? Does someone sneeze on the radio? Nick Abbott's always... But then Nick Abbott is a rule breaker, not a rule taker. He's a maverick. You don't have to be crazy to work here, but it helps. That's Nick Abbott's mantra. You can join him, of course, on LBC this weekend. He not only sneezes on the radio, he positively revels in it. And it's coming back now. Now that I'm talking about it, my nostrils are itching. I'm pretty sure I've never sneezed on the radio. Gary Burton will be in touch in a minute to say, actually, I think you'll find you sneezed on the radio on the 7th of March, 2022. But I don't think I've ever sneezed on the radio. Perhaps I never will. Who knows? I'm staying with this because I just think it's really interesting. And, I mean, there are other stories around, but not ones that necessarily lend themselves to our time together. I don't know what impact on the NHS getting rid of 15,000 managers is going to have. I mean, my initial thought would be that it's unlikely to be an unalloyed positive, but I'll be all over it like a rash when we begin to see the impacts. But theoretical or putative impacts, I don't know that they are necessarily very, very helpful. And I think probably the other contender would be the jobs figures. But short of asking you how hard it is to get a job, which I must have done 35 times in the last 6 months, I don't know how to get into that one either. I'll tell you how we'll do it if we do it later in the week. This is a question inspired slightly by my late father, who was made redundant by the Daily Telegraph shortly, just around about the same time I left school, and would very much have been in the category of people who expected to be in their jobs pretty much until retirement. It was the second or third wave of Fleet Street being shaken by an insecurity that had never previously applied to journalism. And my dad went to the job centre. And I was a little bit embarrassed by that. I was like, why did you go to the job centre? You know, you're going to be fine. And also, you got quite a hefty redundancy payment and stuff. And I was embarrassed on a snobbish level. And I remember my dad saying to me, I've paid all my life. I paid since I was 15 into the system that now might be able to help me. Wasn't going along for the dole, as we used to call it, for the financial payout. Although he was absolutely entitled to that. Of course he was, such as it was. But he was just keen to avail himself of opportunity. There may have been technology there that he didn't have at home. That idea that there used to be a massive support network in place to help you when you were looking for a job must sound to young people a bit like the days before the internet or the days when there were only 3 television channels. It's extraordinary to reflect upon the idea that you used to be a given that you got. So that's how we might get into it tomorrow. Just that question: what happens if I lost my job today? Once the champagne corks had stopped popping across the country and in this building in particular, if I lost my job today, what would happen tomorrow? That's what I want to know. We've done a lot on how hard it is for people graduating and young people to get in. But what about... Yeah, in fact, I've talked myself into it. We'll do that tomorrow. But what would Keir Starmer do tomorrow if he lost his job today? We'll find out. Not about Keir Starmer, but about you and possibly me. We'll probably get stuck into that tomorrow unless the news agenda explodes. Although it is Mystery Hour, so that does limit our options somewhat. 6 minutes after 11 is the time. Questions I've asked you so far. Is Keir Starmer in serious trouble? Which you can't really answer because we can't canvass everybody in the country, let alone everybody in the Parliamentary Labour Party. But we can canvass enough of each other's opinions to work out whether or not enough people who voted for him with a degree of optimism have lost it all and now believe someone else would do that job better. If it was me, I wouldn't move until after the council elections next year. Same with Badenoch. I would not be staggered if we go into the next general election with both main parties led by people who aren't leading them today. I would not be staggered by that. But it doesn't mean I want Starmer to go. I don't care whether Badenoch goes or not. I'd quite like her to stay just for comic value. It's much more fun at PMQs to have her behind the box than it would be if, I don't know, honest Bob Jenrick got there with his mural defacing antics. But I'm looking at performance, polling and policy. The 3 Ps. I don't think you can separate them. Performance, polling and policy. Now, you can point at polling and say a lot of the blame lies with the media, and I wouldn't argue with you. You can't point at policy and say a lot of the blame lies with the media. You can point out perhaps that the positives don't get reported, but the negatives are so big they're drowning out the positives, most obviously still the winter fuel allowance. And then you've got personality. I like this. I've never done this before. The 3 Ps. Yeah? No, what was it again? Policy, performance. Oh, I've forgotten what the 3rd P was. Honestly, one of these days I'm going to have to start writing stuff down and just reading it out to you every day. So you've got this person problem with Starmer. Policy and performance. Policy not his fault. Performance, yes, his fault. So how much of that then congregates to create an idea that somebody else could do a better job? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the bigger question that we haven't really got stuck into is you can step back from this, leave your personal position at the door, and just tell me, why is his personal popularity rating so spectacularly low? So spectacularly low. 9 minutes after 11 is the time. Melissa is in Edinburgh. Melissa, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Melissa.
I am a millennial, a left woke millennial, and as a millennial, I've had my fair share of political turbulence and things. Pretty much throughout my whole adult life, I've been disappointed politically, and I think I would say that the last general election was the first time I actually enthusiastically voted for Labour. And I had such high hopes for Keir, and I like Keir. I think he's a really decent man.
Yes, but I like big butts. I cannot lie. There's a big butt coming, isn't there?
I'm just becoming increasingly disillusioned by Labour in general, but Keir as well. I think the biggest problem he has with the personality aspect of things is, I think...
What were the 3 Ps that I just congratulated myself on coming up with and then immediately forgot again? Can you remember? Can someone rewind live radio and tell me what the 3 Ps were that I came up with a moment ago and then immediately forgot? Sorry, carry on, Melissa.
I think in the age of social media, I think what's happened, whether we like it or not, is we are very used to, and we expect to hear people's opinions about things.
Yes.
I think that's all we hear is everyone has an opinion, and they're very, very good. And the louder they shout, the more they're heard in a way.
Yes.
And Keir just doesn't. I don't know why he really. I know he's a decent bloke. I know he's like a left wing, but I don't know exactly what he stands for in terms of his actual opinion.
Wow.
And I know he wants change, but what does that actually mean? And I think that's where Zach Polanski is kind of where he's cutting through in that sense, that we know what he thinks and he's unapologetic about what he thinks. And you might not agree with everything he thinks, but at least he's saying it, and he's saying it in a way that people are paying attention.
I think he is part of the conniptions that are currently running through corners or parts of Downing Street at the moment. Whether or not he sustains this rather purple period, the more scrutiny he is exposed to remains to be seen, but you can't argue with the fact that he's got a very strong game in the fields you describe, social media, but also that dread phrase, cut through. And yeah. He'll be... so as Starmer tries to woo people who are slightly to the right of Genghis Khan and waving little Nigel Farage flags in their back garden on bonfire night, Zach Polanski is sort of on the left of the Labour Party, hoovering up people that feel abandoned and ignored.
Yeah, I think I'm one of those people, because I think I had hopes that with Labour, what would happen is I was a bit disappointed that they didn't kind of like in the election run-up, they didn't really talk about, actually Brexit is a massive problem that we're a big reason why we're in the mess that we're in. But I kind of understood, and I kind of gave them the benefit of the doubt that they just wanted to shore up as many votes to get into power. And then they would start trying to change the narrative. Once they're in power, they can start changing the kind of the perception of what Brexit is, and kind of saying, well, actually, this is, we're in this because of Brexit, rather than we're in this because of the Tories.
The story this week about, I struggle now to get proper phone-ins out of this, but because I can't keep saying, why aren't we talking about this? Why aren't we talking about this? Pretend you woke up from a coma that you'd been in for the last 10 years and you discovered that one of the most august US economic think tanks, or one of the most august American research bodies, has just estimated that the real loss to GDP caused by Brexit is even higher than the worst possible predictions. And it is not just not appearing anywhere in the UK media, it's not appearing in any analysis of the coming budget. The biggest imaginable bite being taken out of our GDP and the reasons for it don't even merit a mention in coverage of a coming budget in this country at the moment. And I don't know if Labour could have turned that particular oil tanker completely around, but they could have blooming tried.
Yeah, I think we're just not even hearing them say the word Brexit at all.
They've just started. They have just started, because I know this because I did a phone-in on it. They have just started pointing out, but even then they sort of create the Farageist notion that there is a good Brexit. It just goes to a different school. They talk about a bad Brexit deal. They don't talk about the abject and obvious, visible from space idiocy of the whole blooming project. Because they're frightened of losing the votes that are never going to make their way into Zach Polanski's pocket, but which are going to migrate towards politicians still pretending that Brexit was anything other than an abject disaster. Oh, here's a question for you. Come election night, and you're in a constituency where the only way you keep the far right out is by going back to Labour, you'd go back to them, wouldn't you?
If that's literally the only choice, then probably, but it wouldn't make me happy, unfortunately.
No, well, it would be another Loveless Lands one, except it's not going to be a
to be honest with you, I wouldn't even vote. I'd be reluctant because I live in Scotland, but I would in voting for Greens because they're pro-independence. But
yeah, fair enough.
So I would still have to bite my tongue. But I do feel like with him trying to court the right so much.
It feels
that
like
he's
that.
losing the left.
He would say that, I'm trying to reclaim the flag, or I'm trying to make sure that the flag isn't co-opted by the far right. But his avowed intent is often at odds with what we perceive him as having done in terms of those three Ps. If not policy, then certainly performance and personality. What could he do to fix things? For you, because you've given us quite a very personal analysis of the situation. For you, what would make you go, oh, that's better?
I think, to be honest, I might, and I'm sad to say this, but I really just don't think that Keir has the personality to be able to cut through, unfortunately. I don't think he's got the charisma. I think in the age of kind of capitalism and hyper right-wing and the amount of kind of airtime they get, you need to have someone who's really strong and really has so much conviction to really break through. And I don't think he's got that. He's not got that ability. He's too sensible and he's too kind of old school politician in that way.
Maybe. And again, that's what we thought we wanted. We wanted somebody who would be sort of dull, but I don't think any of us thought dull and not very competent, which is perhaps the danger at the moment. I think I get the three Ps were policy, performance and personality, and then I started talking myself out of it because I thought that performance and personality were interchangeable, but they're not, are they? As Melissa has just reminded us. Your personality is what enables you to cut through. Personality informs performance, but they're not synonyms. So those three Ps, he's got problems on all three fronts. He's got policy problems, he's got performance problems, probably best illustrated by, he would insist privately and publicly, that he has been very outspoken and passionate in his attacks on the racism that's not creeping, marching, goose-stepping into public discourse almost everywhere you look. And then on personality, that idea that he can somehow engage, or the magic dust, the charisma, whatever you want to call it. He's got problems on all three of those fronts. I suspect if he was acing it on one of them, he'd probably be okay. If you had aced the policies, you wouldn't care that he was relatively managerial in tone and struggles to set the room on fire when he speaks. would you? If he was acing it on personality, you'd forgive a multitude of sins on policy, just like we did, or you did. I didn't, and I'm sure you didn't, but lots of other people did for Boris Johnson and people like that. I don't care that his integrity and ethics advisors keep resigning. He's lovely. He's really nice to me when he comes in to be interviewed. Performance, if he was acing it on performance, you could forgive policy and personality. I don't know that I like him very much, but blimmin' heck, he certainly gets the fires burning. He certainly he sends a rocket up the country every time. So he's not got... And I hate saying this because, you know, I was as optimistic as the next man, and I still think the situation is retrievable. But what I'd like you to do next is tell me what retrieving it looks like. Working on those three boxes, policy, performance and personality, what does a political rehabilitation look like for Keir Starmer today? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 11:17 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 19 minutes after 11 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean, I've got peas coming out my ears now. Not literally. That was like one of those stories you occasionally read about someone being taken to casualty to discover that they got a pea stuck in their ear 48 years ago, and it's only just... Do you know, I wondered why I couldn't hear the football. You know the stories, or up their nose. It's usually up their nose, isn't it? Because there's such a big cavity halfway up your nose that you could lose a Star Wars figure in there almost and not know it was there until years later when you went for a head X-ray. So the original 3 Ps were personality, polling, polling, performance and policy. And that, of course, admits the conflation of personality and performance. But they're not identical. So now we're up to 4 Ps. Keir Starmer's 4P problem. Personality, polling, performance and policy. But what if it is, having spoken to Melissa in Edinburgh, what if it's a 5P problem? What if Keir Starmer has a 5P problem or a 1 shilling problem in old money? Because that would be Polanski, personality, polling, performance and policy. How much of the panic in Downing Street, which informs today's conversation about threats to Keir Starmer's leadership, how much of the panic in Downing Street, that's your 6th P, panic, is down to Polanski? And how much of the dissatisfaction with Starmer is down to personality, polling, performance and policy? How much of the panic is down to personality, polling, performance, policy and Polanski? Any other Ps? Pumpkins? Pusillanimous? Any other Ps that are pertinent, any more pertinent Ps to the conversation under discussion? I do not know. But how do you fix it? Can you think of a word for fixing it that begins with P? No, me neither. Mark's in Birmingham. Mark, what made you pick up the phone, if you can remember?
Hello, James. How are you doing?
Very well, mate. What's going on?
Yeah, so kind of, I guess 2 points. One sort of leaning into the previous question and one into the current question. So I think we all know what the tangible damage that Brexit did to this country, but as you and I both know, there's also a huge amount of damage that was done to objectivity, rationality, all that sort of stuff in this country. And what that led to was people like myself who voted for Labour at the last election. I just wanted somebody boring.
Yeah,
it didn't bother me that Starmer wasn't a great orator. It didn't bother me that he was John Major version 2, but on the other side of the political spectrum.
Probably closer to each other than either of them are to honest Bob Jenrick or Katie Lamb, to be honest with you.
Exactly right. None of that bothered me. But what I think the major issue has been right out of the gate, the winter fuel allowance. It was
policy. So that's under policy, right?
Exactly that. And then you throw into that the Angela Rayner problems, the cock up with the letting agents with Rachel Reeves. She did nothing wrong, but that's not how it's going to be portrayed and remembered in the media.
You've done it. You've come up with another P. You've come up with another P. Perception.
There you go. Do I get a free copy of a Mystery Hour for that?
Yeah, absolutely. No, of course you don't. I can only give those away on Thursdays. It's the law.
It was worth a try.
Of course it was.
And the big issue with that is he's waiting in the wings, is Farage.
Yes.
He's waiting in the wings, and if there was an election tomorrow, he'd win it. And
probably,
with a cabinet,
certainly, possibly, unless the polling that, well, who'd be in the cabinet? All the people from Kent. Do you know, I agree with him about something. Can you guess what it is?
price of fish? I honestly don't know.
I think we absolutely should look at Kent County Council for an illustration of exactly how reform would run the country.
Oh, 100%.
I think it's a stroke of genius for him to introduce that into public discourse. Kent County Council provides us with a perfect idea of what it would be like to have a government run by Reform UK. It's the fire service that's in complete chaos at the moment. That's the latest story, and I think they might have lost another councillor. But Henry Riley's on holiday, so it's very hard to keep track when I find myself unaided.
But here's the thing: like we'll never read about any of that.
No.
And we'll never read about the poor job that he's doing in Clacton. There was a wonderful social media campaign. I forget the name of the lady that did it. She basically had a truck with a video wall going around Clacton.
Was it the donkeys? Was it led by donkeys?
It could have been. It could have been. I honestly can't remember.
Well, that's when we're back to media, or indeed perception, isn't it? Is that Starmer's dealing with a media that pretends to care more about a stupid and entirely culpable edit on Panorama than it does about the fact that the US president is still lying about winning the 2020 election. It's an extraordinary double standard, all of which makes the next question presumably impossible to answer. How does he turn things around? Because any Labour, and that's why the Ps are important, because some Labour leaders, potential future Labour leaders, would not have the same collection of Ps. They might, for example, be doing better on personality and performance, which would mean they were doing better on polling, even if they didn't necessarily change anything on policy. So how does he turn things around?
The short answer is, given the world we live in with instant gratification with regards to our leaders, and weirdly, the footballification thing rings true on two fronts here. Football managers don't get given enough time with their clubs. I don't think we give political leaders enough time to turn things around. However, there are two things that are kind of going on in the background that do give me cause for optimism. So the first is around education and what they're looking to do with more of a skills-based curriculum, critical thinking, all that type of stuff. And if that's given time to embed, that will be a great thing. It was one of the big successes of Blair's version of Labour. We get lost in all the Iraq stuff, but the fact of the matter is that under that iteration of Labour, education soared.
Yeah, true.
And then it got destroyed, and I'm hoping we can see it again. The other one, and I may be bleeding into the conversation you're going to be having tomorrow here. So I work in recruitment, so this is going to be tied to jobs in the jobs market. And there's a weird juxtaposition at the moment. So right now, unemployment's going up, and it's all doom and gloom. But the weird thing is, we're in the middle, so I can only speak for my company, my role. It has been the busiest summer, and it continues to be the busiest autumn I've ever seen.
Really?
So the recruitment sector, and I talk to people who are in other areas of recruitment, and it's busier than it's ever been. The single biggest change, though, is it's a much more client-led market. So clients are being a lot more picky, which is creating frustration in the job seekers market and the candidate market. And going back to the media, you can predict which one we're seeing in places like which accounts we're seeing in the Daily Mail and the Telegraph. So the employment sector, put it this way, I'm more interested in where those unemployment numbers are going to be in 18 months and 2 years' time.
And that is probably, I mean, that is phase two, isn't it, of whatever passes for a plan, another P, in Downing Street at the moment, would be wait and see pie, with grounds for optimism. Someone from Goldman Sachs was making positive noises about the economy. I must dig that story out if I'm going to reference it again. And a piece in either the Telegraph or the Mail, admittedly it's framed in pessimism. It's saying actually things are beginning to get better, green shoots are appearing. But I'm sure that Rachel Reeves is about to, stamp them all out of existence. So, I mean, that is, if people feel improvement. That story, did you hear the story in the news, Mark, about the RAC saying that road repairs are up 15%? The problem with statistics like that is that there's still one on my road.
That one.
Well, I mean, it's obviously true because the RAC is saying it, and they've got no reason to do so. I just mean that they are obviously independent. They're not in hock to the government. And yet I've still got loads of potholes on my street, so I'm going to walk out of my front door and I'm not going to register. I don't know what the figure has to get to for people to feel that it's true, rather than just to go, well, that's nice for someone. Someone's had their potholes fixed. I haven't, but it's a weird one, isn't it? But yeah, that's policy or performance.
Yeah, it's exactly that. We're very good as we're a nation of complainers, and we're very, very good at looking over the neighbour's fence and saying, well, this person's got life a little bit easier than me. shifting the blame to somebody else. But I think that personally, once stuff starts coming out of Downing Street about leadership challenges, Starmer's on a ticking clock.
It's not great.
I don't think there's any escape in that. But I just wanted something different.
Yeah, and we got it, and we didn't mean this. Well, he didn't imagine this, because I disagree with you a bit on the very beginning of your call, just on relative trivialities. Is I genuinely did think that he was going to find a gear in government that I thought I'd seen in opposition. Whether the sort of forensic nature of him boxing Boris Johnson in on the parties, that moment where he just said, OK, we'll leave that right there. And it may be that the myth has overtaken the man, but we suggested at the time, and events seemed to bear out the theory, that he knew he'd got him at that point, and he knew he couldn't drive that. See, if Johnson had got the advantage over somebody, he'd have already started his lap of honour. I like the way that Keir Starmer appeared to sort of operate on a much more tactical and forensic level. And then not private, because there was a theatre full of people, but the only time I've sat down for an appreciable, I think the only time I've ever sat down with Keir Starmer, he may have been in the studio, I can't remember, was on stage in Leicester Square a few years ago when he was still in opposition. And he showed a side. He had I promise you can listen to it on Full Disclosure, but I don't know whether it works on audio, whether it needed you to be present. But he had the room at times eating out of his hand in a way that is almost impossible to believe when you look at him today through the lens of the Ps, the personality polling, performance and policy problems that he has. But I promise you he did. There's one story in particular about going to Downing Street with his parents, with the big dogs. I can't remember whether they had Great Danes or Dobermans, but big old dogs in the back of the sort of knackered old Volvo. Just a really lovely story, and told by someone who came across as a really lovely man from a really loving family. How many people can argue that they've ever seen that? Well, maybe we'll see it today, because PMQs is on the way at 12. Here's Lottie Morley with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
Here's the thing. It's 11:33. Two stories that really speak to something I really care about. You know, I never pretend to care about things when I'm with you. Do you know why? Because you'd be able to tell. You'd be able to tell from a mile off if I was being inauthentic, if I was trying to manufacture strong opinions about. To be fair, I've got so many strong opinions that I shouldn't ever really need to pretend that I feel more strongly about something than I really do. You surprise me sometimes, or I surprise myself sometimes halfway through an introduction to a subject. I realise I care about even more than I thought I did when I started. But the thing I really care about, is the way that they are telling lies about my town. And the usual people, of course, the racists and the fascists and the crypto-Nazis, the way they're telling lies about London, often while claiming to be patriots, it boils my blood. Whenever I say boils my blood, I'm obviously wishing I could say something else, but can't, thanks to Ofcom. But it really boils my blood when I catch them, when I see them. It's everywhere. I got cross at first when I was still on Twitter last year, and you'd see these weird accounts with like loads of flags and bulldogs and loads of numbers after their names that had suddenly been turned into money spinners by Elon Musk and his absolute abandonment of standards and decency and his commoditisation of race hate and Nazism. Even before he did the salutes at that meeting, at that gathering, at that rally. It used to drive me mad. Sort of live here. I've had the pleasure recently of going out quite a lot in the evening. Seen a few shows. Othello, Toby Jones, David Harewood. Wow. Toby's the guest on Full Disclosure this week. That's an absolute classic of the genre. And then I went to see Elf last week. Aled Jones in it as well. And you know, I'm with my family and we're walking back to Waterloo over the bridge, walking through the West End at night, late at night in the dark. And this idea that London is, you know, where violent crime is down, phone theft is up. I absolutely remind you that it's pointless to pretend otherwise. But do you know what else is up? Ownership of really expensive phones. But this idea that people who live in countries where schools are routinely shot up by former pupils or you know, other psychopaths, that we're less safe. It drives me absolutely bonkers. People who really should know better have I've got this second-hand. I'm not going to tell you who, but someone who counts a lot of very, 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 very high up tech bros among his social circle, and they're getting in touch with him from Silicon Valley, like really big deal kind of guys, and they're saying, "Oh, how are you getting on? How are you surviving in London? How are you finding it?" And he's like, "What? What are you talking about? Why on earth would anybody ever want to live anywhere else?" And these people who call themselves patriots are attacking London. And oddly, it's the Dorchester Hotel of all places that have drawn my attention to this story. The general manager of the Dorchester, which is a super posh hotel in the heart of central London, has pointed out that we need to do a better story of telling the truth about our capital because of all the racists and liars on social media who are trying to portray London as some sort of hellhole. Do you remember when they talked about no-go zones back in the day? And you would literally have to have never been to London in your life to believe that there was any truth in that at all. There are always places that the police may fear to tread because of a stranglehold of violence or gang culture or whatever it may be. But the idea that you weren't allowed to go to parts of London because of all the Muslims was frankly extraordinary for those of us who live here and work here and spend every single minute of every single day here. But it captured the imagination. I presume that some of the usual far-right figures in our own political spectrum talked about it as well. But it drives me nuts. There is a funny element to this story, which is in the news today. I don't know if you've seen it, but it would appear that somebody who sought to become Trump's press secretary is being sought for the alleged racist abuse of a Londoner while visiting London for the United States of America. So if you want to portray a threat to ordinary law-abiding decent Brits going around their capital city, it could allegedly be presented by Donald Trump supporting Americans visiting from the other side of the Atlantic, but we may get back to that. And I mention it for two reasons. Number one, a couple of you are mentioning Zoran Mamdani as something Keir Starmer should emulate, and sadly, that doesn't work because you don't win New York with the skill set that you need to win a whole country. That's why I mentioned London, because London is distinct from much of the United Kingdom because it is more cosmopolitan, it is more diverse, it is considerably more economically productive. These aren't opinions, this is counting. You know, I come from Kidderminster. You can barely get further from the Bow Bells. I am no Cockney, but I am a Londoner. Latterly, from the age of 18, 19 onwards, London is I love London. I love London. I could never imagine living anywhere else. When I think about retiring, maybe spend my weekends by the seaside, but my goodness me, I want to be smack in the middle of things. If I'm well off enough, I'd like to move further into London when we can get by with a smaller home because the kids have flown the nest. I just love London. I don't know how anyone can not love London. I remember the first time I visited London, up from Kidderminster, I went to see 42nd Street at the Drury Lane Theatre. I got stuck in the cage lifts at Covent Garden. Do you remember the cage lifts? My dad grabbed me by the arm and yanked me out of the cage lift at Covent Garden. Even that was exciting, sitting in black cabs, pulling down the seat in the back of a black cab, looking at the lights, going into Piccadilly Circus and thinking that you'd arrived in the future. And it's better now than it was then. That's the most extraordinary thing. You wander around London now, you can eat food from pretty much every culture under the sun. You've got people occasionally who will even smile at you. You've got public transport that can get you from one side of the city to the other in a comparative blink of an eye. You don't even have to change trains or tubes a lot of the time. An absolutely magnificent city, the finest place to live on God's green earth. And yet racists and various other freak shows who claim to be patriotic are never happier than when they're attacking London. A bit like the BBC, actually. You show me better value for money than the BBC when it comes to what you get in return for your licence fee, and I'll give you the money myself. They're absolutely impossible to make comparisons with anything else from Netflix down. But the effort, the determination, the relish put into demeaning and denigrating all the things that are best about Britain, whether it's the BBC or whether it's the capital city, by people who claim to be patriotic. Riddle me that. People who lie about crime statistics, people who lie about community cohesion, people who hate London because it is all the things they claim don't work. Diversity, equality, inclusion, all the things that they lie awake at night despising like black people in adverts. London is living, breathing, throbbing, pulsing proof of just how magnificent a city can be if it's made up of magnificent people. And I find it utterly baffling. But, unfortunately, that is why the answer to the question of what Keir Starmer needs to do differently is not Zoran Mamdani, because he's got to also appeal to people outside the big cities, outside the big metropolises, who, in some cases, will be believing the nonsense that they're seeing on social media or hearing drip from the grisly maw of far-right politicians and the likes of Nigel Farage. 41 minutes after 11 is the time. I don't know where that came from, but it's a subject I'm conscious we haven't done enough of on the programme. Also, for reasons, this show has a little tiny bit of cut-through in the States thanks to YouTube. And the idea that we should be telling Americans in particular that if you think we've got problems, here's a mirror for you to look in, lads. London, compared to any city in America, is safer, cleaner, tidier, happier, and with the possible exception of New York, absolutely overburdened with way more culture and cuisine than you could possibly imagine. But hey-ho, here's Billy Buncher-Numbers on Twitter with a bulldog avatar and 73 flags in his profile to tell you that London is a no-go zone and it's not safe and that we've got Sharia law. Oh, he's also thinking of emigrating to the UAE soon, where they have actually got Sharia law. Madness. Sorry. Craig's in Liverpool. Can you remember what the actual phone-in is about today, Craig?
Yeah, good morning, James.
Carry on.
I am a Labour supporter. I'm from Liverpool, diverse city. It is a diverse city.
Yes.
But what I'm finding it hard to defend Labour. Everything that they stood up for in the manifesto, they seem to be doing a U-turn on, or perceived to be making a U-turn on. And I think a large part of the problem, even with Keir Starmer, is they don't have a particular catchphrase or something they can hang the hat on. Johnson had get Brexit done.
Yeah.
Farage has got stop the boats. They started with strong and stable by Rachel Reeves, and that doesn't seem to have hit home, and they don't seem to have anywhere
Theresa
to go.
May had that, didn't she? Wasn't that Theresa May?
Theresa May had it as well, yeah. But we don't seem to have, even in my city in Liverpool, people are now turning to reform, which I never thought I'd see.
No.
And nobody seems to like Keir Starmer.
Why do you think that is? Because he might be a little bit ineffectual, but that's not enough to inspire the levels of vitriol that you sometimes encounter. Yeah, Elon Musk's influence notwithstanding, but, you know, if you're basing your views on British politics from what you're seeing on Twitter, then you are obviously both in danger of drowning in bile and supremely misinformed. But it's bigger than that. For the impact on polling, it can't just be Elon Musk turning Twitter into a racist sewer.
No, I think as well, Keir Starmer doesn't appear on TV to have the same sort of charisma that you were referring to before when you were in his
Tony Blair had it. Tony Blair had it.
I always remember. I remember when Neil Kinnock fell over on the beach.
Yeah, so do I.
And I remember being in the pub at the time, and one of my mates saying to me, "I would never vote Labour again, because if you can't even stand up on a beach, how can you lead the country?"
That's pathetic.
And it is, but
it speaks to perception, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, and unfortunately, some of these people, you know, I argue with people on a daily basis over reform, and they say, other than immigration, give me one of their policies, and they can't, because they
haven't really got a policy on immigration either. They're just that we will fix it and get rid of people.
Yeah.
And don't say how. Don't ask us, we'll leave the European Convention on Human Rights that Winston Churchill championed. Why?
Yeah.
Well, because then we'll be able to deport people. Where to? Oh, don't ask us where to. Rwanda or something. I mean, you know this better than I do because you're dealing with these people rather more than I get to these days, sadly. They tend not to ring me anymore. They're too busy talking to you.
But in regards of if we did replace Keir Starmer,
yes.
I'd like to see Davin Jones.
Keeps a low profile. I mean, he was talked of as a leadership candidate when he barely had got into Parliament. But as a widower, I think he took the view that he needed to raise his young family. He needed to be there for them rather more. But he does seem to be increasing his profile. That's why I said earlier the thing about that, I probably misquoted it, about he who wields the dagger never wears the crown, is that the names that are bandied around when talk first begins are not always, and indeed are only rarely, the names that are still in the frame at the end of the conversation. John Major being an odd example of that. Even though he was Chancellor, everyone had talked about Heseltine replacing Thatcher for the longest time. Do you know what John Major did? This is a fascinating... You probably know, actually, but for people who don't, he just went AWOL. He just stayed absolutely out of everything, claiming that he had appalling toothache as a consequence of some quite serious dental work. Didn't answer the phone, just stayed absolutely off the radar until he had seen which way the land lied, waiting for the opportunity to move. Douglas Hurd was in the frame, Michael Heseltine was in the frame, and then John Major came up on the outside, didn't he, and beat them all?
Yeah, and I think he would be a really good Prime Minister. I like the way he comes over. I mean Dan Jarvis, not Darren Jones. Sorry, it's not that. Darren Jones isn't a widower. Right, okay. I meant Dan Jarvis, sorry. It's those flipping, it's the initials again, isn't it? But he's quite a good guy. He could be another name that ends up back in the mix as well. But yeah, Darren Jones is playing a blinder. I'm going to do something, because it's important that I do, and I probably should have done it sooner, because a lot of people would agree with what you said at the outset, and you may know this stuff, because you qualified it by saying perception of achievements. But, you know, in no particular order, the Employment Rights Bill, the National Wealth Fund, the Affordable Homes Programme, Great British Energy, lifting the ban on wind power and approving more solar farms, onshore wind power, 131 new renewable energy projects to power 11 million homes, the warm home plans to keep 1 million renters with energy bills that they can afford, 4.5 million new NHS appointments when they only promised 2 million more, 1,000 more GPs announced, not yet recruited, but the wheels are turning, 400 million quid in investment secured for clinical trials, school breakfast clubs, free childcare, assistance with school uniform costs, planning reforms to speed up home and infrastructure building, the 1.5 million new homes promised, which looks, tricky, but they're still going to end up with a lot more than they started with, and £120 billion in rail and road upgrades, coupled with, of course, nationalisation of some railway lines. So there's quite a lot there, mate, isn't there? But it's not landing in Liverpool. But they don't bleat about it.
They should be doing more. But where? And then we're back to the media, which is where all roads ultimately lead, but that is the reality with which you have to deal. So that's not an answer to the question of what you can do differently. You can't change the way that the media works in this country. You can't change the fact that people who invite Boris Johnson into their newspaper offices and radio and television studios and tickle his toes until he can't stop giggling, treat Keir Starmer as if he is a combination of the Grim Reaper and Pol Pot. It's absolutely extraordinary. I've watched it with my own eyes. Oh, come in, you big, enormous liar. And I'll give you a packet of crumpets and a kiss on the cheek. Oh, Keir Starmer here, an utterly inoffensive man who is doing his very best, albeit not very successfully. Why are you so evil? 11:48 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:52. I think, you know what happens if I come up with a wizard wheeze. I forget about it by the next day, and the people who I rely upon to remind me forget about it as well, and I can't even criticise them because I forgot about it first. But I'd like to become a focal point for bigging up London, actually. I work in the middle of London, smack in the middle of Leicester Square. The lies that are told about my capital. I see Dom Jolly has done... Well, I see Dom Jolly has done something similar on Facebook. Dom Jolly has just sent me a link to him doing something similar on Facebook 4 or 5 days ago. He'll stick something on social media, and about a quarter of the replies underneath, if he's posted footage of himself in London, are just telling lies about our capital city. A bit like attacks on the BBC. It's such an unpatriotic thing to do, to side with foreign liars against your own state broadcaster is a frankly extraordinarily treacherous thing to do. But to attack your own capital city, particularly if it's a country you seek to govern, it's extra. So let's put our heads together on this and work out how we can actually start pushing back a bit. I'll take care of the viral clips. You tell me what to say. How does that work? Does that work? Is that a good breakdown of things? Will get people on. Make comparisons. It's just of all the bonkersness that you think you don't have to deal with because it's so obviously bonkers that everybody with a brain will see through it in a heartbeat. This is one of the biggest. Should have dealt with it. Should have pushed back. Mayor of London elected 3 times on the trot. Yeah, but that's because they're all Muslims. Well, you can't count, mate. And if we did have Sharia law in London, we wouldn't have any shoplifting because they'd have chopped everybody's arms off. Make your mind up, will you, about what lies it is you're going to subscribe to? Or is it simply the fact that if it's racist lies you're subscribing to, then the truth never gets a flipping look in? Here we go. Anyway, I am with the general manager of the Dorchester Hotel, where I am more than happy to have a meeting over dinner paid for by you. I am with the general manager of the Dorchester Hotel when he says we've got to start telling a better story. We've got to start telling the truth. Anyway, this isn't a topic today. I just keep going off on one. Come on, London. George is in Fareham. Back to Keir Starmer. What do you reckon, George?
Well, I'm politically uninfused, so probably one of the groups that you would call a floater. But I think the problem with Keir, and not just Keir, it's politics in general for me at the minute. There's nobody who's got that extra ingredient, and he's more of a manager than a leader.
But that's what we wanted, isn't it? I mean, I don't know what a leader is, but you had someone who could talk a good game and deliver absolute bilge like Boris Johnson, enthralling the nation for a while. You sort of thought that the antidote to that is someone who will just quietly get on with things.
Yeah, I just don't think it's working, clearly. I mean, all those successes that you list, and it just proves itself that they're not landing as a success with people. And that promotion of his personality and his extra ingredient that he's missing just doesn't seem to get people, emotive about following him or running over the hill for him. And I think, as much as a bumbling idiot that Boris was, he invoked that encouragement in people and emotion somehow. And I think
he did, but he was a massive fraud.
He was, but people followed him, and Farage is probably,
an even massiver floater.
And he's not the answer, but it's as close to somebody that you're going to follow in the country at the moment, and that's the concern.
That's the problem, isn't it? Really, and what on earth does it say about us as a population? Imagine thinking that the people who brought you Brexit are the answers to your next set of problems that were caused in large part by the bloody Brexit that they encouraged you to vote for in the first place. Farage called Liz Truss's fiscal event the best Tory budget he'd seen since, 1843 or something. Literally praising Liz Truss to the rafters while he'd barely got his breath back after claiming that Brexit was going to be brilliant, and yet the country's full of people that think he's the answer to the next load of problems that the country faces. I don't know if anyone can deal with that level of delusion and stupidity and racism.
Well, the media, like you say, is, there's a massive issue with the media in this country. Social media, written media, it's intrinsically failed the people.
London, my little London rant is quite a good example of that, actually, isn't it? Is that people can believe something so fundamentally and spectacularly untrue about their own capital city, then they can believe something spectacularly untrue about almost anything and anyone.
Oh. But where do people go for the truth, James? That's the problem. There is nowhere now that you can find the truth. Even for Brexit, I wasn't a supporter or a disser, but I tried to do research, and to come up with facts and figures is an impossibility nowadays. You can't do it. It's just not there.
Well, I can give you some rather splendid advice, actually. The National Bureau of Economic Research in the United States of America have just published a paper on the economic impact of Brexit that is incredibly detailed, incredibly well sourced, incredibly well evidenced, and incredibly authoritative. And it was published this very week under the title "The Economic Impact of Brexit." That's the NBER, a US and therefore entirely impartial observer. The conclusion being that the impact upon our GDP is even higher than the worst case predictions at the time over the 10-year period. The predictions that were not facts, George, because predictions can never be facts, but they were borne out by events. The predictions of what the impact on GDP would be in the first 5 years after the vote have been borne out more or less by events, but the predictions of how badly it would be affected over the 10-year period are even higher than the worst-case scenarios. And to drive your point home, you won't be hearing that anytime soon on programmes presented by people who told you to vote for Brexit, or indeed in newspapers that told you to vote for Brexit, or indeed from politicians who told you to vote for Brexit. Let me get you the exact figure there. The impact accumulating gradually over time. We Brexit reduced UK GDP by 6 to 8%, with the impact accumulating gradually over time. Investment reduced by between 12 and 18. Employment by 3 to 4. Productivity by 3 to 4%. And on it goes. These forecasts show, or rather our research shows, that these forecasts were accurate over a 5-year horizon, but they underestimated the impact over a decade. So the facts are there, but it's not your job to know where they are, unless you actually do present a radio programme like this down in Fareham. It's my job to tell you. But I'm just one tiny little voice in the wilderness. Sometimes it feels like I'm barking at the moon. Natasha Clark is here to tell us what is likely to come up at PMQs today. I'm quite looking forward to it again. There must be something wrong with me.
I'm looking forward to it, but probably for different reasons to you, I imagine. But just because of all of this psychodrama that's been it's been dominating Westminster for the last 24 hours. It's been absolutely mad.
For the avoidance of doubt, this is a story that has its genesis in Downing Street.
It is.
This is what I think some of my listeners, who I was a bit rude to at the top of the show, are struggling to understand. This is a story that Downing Street have generated, created and disseminated.
Themselves, absolutely. Yeah. And look, full disclosure, obviously there are people in those newspapers that were briefed to that know exactly who in Downing Street that is. I have not got exactly the same people in Downing Street telling me exactly the same thing as they are. I have got other people in Downing Street telling me different things. Cool. But this is an extraordinary story because, as you say, this is coming from the heart of number 10 Downing Street, that people close to the Prime Minister are seemingly attempting to try to flush out a potential leadership challenge against him by trying to bring conversations which, let's be honest, are happening in the back streets of Westminster and in pubs.
But they're happening a bit more than usual.
They are happening a bit more than usual. It's fair to say they have, absolutely ramped up in the past few weeks. And of course, ahead of the budget, everybody is getting very jittery with what might be about to happen if Rachel Reeves breaks that manifesto promise. But to
when?
See well,
is it when? Do you still think it's if?
I think it's when now. I think I've changed my mind. I think I have changed my mind to say...
You'll learn.
Yeah, no. No, I think it's right to change
no, of course it is. I'm teasing you.
There is always a way in which this doesn't happen, but I think they are seriously considering, and all the evidence points to this being something that the government are about to do. You're totally right. But yes, if and when that happens, it's going to be a big moment for the government. Can you weather that storm of breaking a manifesto promise? Yes or no? And there are people openly speculating in Westminster about what happens and what that means for the Prime Minister, what that means for the Chancellor, if and when it happens. And one person in government said to me last week, could this be the end of the government? Is this the beginning of that process which does lead to Keir Starmer's downfall? And those conversations are happening more and more and more. And you're talking to Labour MPs, to
That's
special
the crucial
advisors.
point, is that it is people worried about their own seats. It's people who want Labour to win the next election who are leading the conversation about getting rid of Keir.
Exactly. So
not people that wish him ill or want Labour to be consigned to the wilderness for years to come.
Yeah, these are people who are worried that they are going to lose their seats at some point and are worried that maybe this might not be the guy to lead us into the next election, and that potentially they may have a better chance with somebody else. And of course, outside of Westminster, all they will see is infighting, psychodrama, knives out for each other, all in it for themselves.
Yeah.
And equally,
very unedifying.
They have a bit of a point, don't they?
Yes.
It's fair to say that lots of people outside Westminster are not worried about Westminster psychodrama. They're worried about the NHS. They're worried about the economy. They're worried about immigration. They're worried about prisoners being on the loose. And it's fair to say that this government are creating a distraction when they're talking about something completely
genuinely extraordinary. Obviously, we're at the point in the week where we will cross without much warning to Westminster, to the House of Commons, as soon as Kemi Badenoch gets to her feet, because it's not that long ago that we were discussing the likelihood of her being toppled by a leadership challenge. I mean, honest Bob Jenrick is cursed with one of those faces that is going to look ferret-like and furtive in all circumstances, but he is particularly ferret-like and furtive at the moment. So does that give her pause before going in on leadership threats, because once again Keir Starmer just comes back with, well, I know you are, but what am I?
Exactly. And I think it's crazy that we're talking about Keir Starmer facing a leadership challenge when everybody in Westminster has for months thought it's far more likely that Kemi Badenoch will be the first one to face that leadership challenge. So absolutely, I don't think Kemi Badenoch is going to go in on this at Prime Minister's Questions. I'm sure it will come up in some shape or form. But if I were her, I'd be going on, oh, well, last time I came to see you at the dispatch box, Prime Minister, you all but told me that income tax is going up. I wouldn't be surprised if she goes on something similar to the economy in terms of that message today. And obviously she didn't get the chance to do that last week because she wasn't there. She gave it to James Cartledge to perform with David Lammy. And
he's very cartilaginous.
Cartilaginous, what does that mean?
It's just a new word I got introduced to today. Oh, hang on, here we go.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I associate my party with the Prime Minister's comments about Remembrance Week and also his comments on Manfred Goldberg and Mervyn Kirsch, who is in the gallery today? Mr. Speaker, this morning on the BBC, the Health Secretary said there is a toxic culture in Downing Street that needs to change. He's right, isn't he?
Mr. Speaker, my focus each and every day is on rebuilding and renewing our country. But let me be absolutely clear, any attack on any member of my cabinet is completely unacceptable. On the Health Secretary, Mr. Speaker, in relation to Health Secretary, he promised before the election that in the first year of a Labour government we'd deliver 2 million extra appointments. We didn't deliver 2 million, or 3 or 4. We delivered 5 million extra appointments. And today the Health Secretary is in Manchester, where he's announcing that because of the action he's taken to abolish NHS England, he's putting more people on the front line. He's doing a great job, as is the whole of my cabinet.
Mr. Speaker, what we heard the Health Secretary say this morning was that he wants to cut waiting lists, but we all know that there's only one waiting list that he really wants to cut. But the Prime Minister is not going to do anything about the toxic culture. This is his responsibility. Just last night, his allies accused not just the Health Secretary, but the Home Secretary and even the Energy Secretary of launching leadership bids. These attacks came from Number 10, nowhere else, his toxic Number 10. The person responsible for the culture in Number 10 is his Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney. Does the Prime Minister have full confidence in him?
Morgan McSweeney, my team and I are absolutely focused on delivering for the country. And let me be clear, of course, Mr. Speaker, I've never authorised attacks on cabinet members. I appointed them to their posts because they're the best people to carry out their jobs. And Mr. Speaker, she asks about waiting lists. Waiting lists are down under this government. The number of GPs is up. And because we scrapped NHS England, we're investing on the front line. That's what the Health Secretary is doing today, getting on with his job, and he's doing a very good job too.
Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear him give full confidence to Morgan McSweeney, but the truth is he says these attacks aren't authorised. That means he's lost control of Number 10 because that's where they're coming from. But the real scandal, Mr. Speaker, the real scandal is that 2 weeks from a budget, the government has descended into civil war. Instead of fixing the mess they've made of the economy, they're all... Mr. Speaker, they're all chuntering. These are the feral MPs that Number 10 has been talking about. They're not my words. They're Number 10's words, his words. But unbelievably, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister's advisors have been reduced to briefing that MPs can't get rid of him, and I'm not making this up, they can't get rid of him because it would destabilise international markets. Why does the Prime Minister think that there would be a market meltdown if the Health Secretary took over?
Mr. Speaker, this is a united team and we are delivering together. Look what we're doing. The fastest growth of the G7. 5 interest rate cuts. Trade deals with the EU, the US and India, all of which they oppose, we've delivered. And I can update the House.
If people want to audition for a pantomime, I suggest you go to the Old Vic.
Right, pantomime. Mr. Speaker, I can update the House. The Bank of England has upgraded growth today. We've secured £230 billion of private investment. And just this morning, I thought she might welcome it, the SSE have announced £33 billion of investment in clean power. That's what this team are delivering for the country, fixing the mess that they left.
Mr. Speaker, he's talking about growth and investment while the Prime Minister desperately tries to cling on to his own job. Perhaps he understands what it's like for all those people out there losing their jobs. How can he talk about growth? Yesterday, we learned that unemployment has risen to the same rate as it was in lockdown. 180,000 jobs lost, Mr. Speaker. Why does the Prime Minister think that unemployment has risen every single month since Labour took office?
Mr. Speaker, let me give the House the details. 329,000 people more are in work since the start of this year. So 329,000 more are in work. Of course, I accept we need to do more in relation to unemployment. That's why we're transforming job centres, which they opposed. That's why we're working with 60 major businesses to tackle ill health in the workplace and invested £3.8 billion in tailored back-to-work support, which they opposed. I would also remind the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Speaker, that the average unemployment in the 14 years of her government was 5.4%, higher than the rate today.
Mr. Speaker, we left employment higher than it was after the last Labour government. And let me tell him now, what is causing it is his disastrous budget last year. That is what has caused the increase in unemployment. And so, to be clear, for all those Labour MPs shaking their heads, it's last year's tax rises that have killed jobs, and that's what's going to trigger this year's tax rises. This is the tax doom loop, and there is only one way out of it, and that is to cut spending. So why is the Prime Minister instead offering welfare giveaways to save his own skin?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'll tell the Opposition why we increased national insurance. It's because of the mess that they left the country in. The NHS on its knees. Now we've got 5 million extra appointments, waiting lists down, and 2,500 more GPs as a result of our decisions. But it's nearly the one-year anniversary, but she still hasn't told us in relation to national insurance whether she agrees and admits that we should do it, or if that's her position, how she would find the money that we raised in the budget. She's had a whole year to think about that question. Perhaps now she can give us an answer.
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't have made the stupid mistake in the first place of putting up the jobs tax and killing jobs. Since they came in, it's been disaster after disaster. The Deputy Prime Minister, the new Deputy Prime Minister, is clueless about how many illegal migrant sex offenders he's let loose. The Culture Secretary breaking the rules to give her donor a top job. Taxes set to rise even further. Unemployment at levels not seen since lockdown. And in the middle of it, a weak Prime Minister at war with his own cabinet. Mr. Speaker, it's not just him, it is all of them. There is no replacement, it is all of them. 2 weeks before the budget, isn't it the case that this Prime Minister has lost control of his government, he's lost the confidence of his party, and lost the trust of the British people?
Mr. Speaker, the stupid mistakes were made over 14 long years. They broke the economy, and now they think that they can lecture us. And now they've got this unserious idea that they can find £47 billion of cuts without saying where they're going to come from. No wonder that's called flimsy. Meanwhile, we're rebuilding the country. Wages up, investment up, mortgages down.
Order. Mr. Phil. You were meant to be a senior person on this front bench. You're meant to set an example. It's certainly a bad one today. Shows you, Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, despite extra government funding, adult social care services in my community are in disarray. My constituents are also facing a new fire risk because we don't have a fully functioning fire authority. This has all been caused by the dysfunction at Kent County Council because so many reform councillors have been suspended for bad behaviour. So does the Prime Minister share my concern that reform chaos is a risk to public safety?
My sympathy is with the people of Kent whose lives are being disrupted by the staggering incompetence of reform. Mr. Speaker, Kent County Council was supposed to be the blueprint for what reform would deliver across the country. Now we can see what that means. Cutting local services, raising council tax, failing to protect the public. That's all reform have to offer. Grievance, division and total incompetence.
leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with the earlier remarks of the Prime Minister and say what a great honour it was to join the royal family at the Cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday to pay our respects to all those heroes who gave their lives for our country. We must never forget the sacrifice they made for our freedoms. Mr. Speaker, a great British institution is under attack from a foreign government. President Trump is trying to destroy our BBC, not because he cares about the truth, but because he doesn't want to get away with his lies. Trump has undermined press freedom in America. Now he's trying to do the same here, disgracefully egged on by the leader of Reform. So will the Prime Minister tell President Trump to drop his demand for $1 billion settlement from the BBC? And will he guarantee that President Trump will not get a single penny from British licence fee payers?
Let me be clear. I believe in a strong and independent BBC. Some would rather the BBC didn't exist. Some of them are sitting up there. I'm not one of them. In an age of disinformation, the argument for impartial British news service is stronger than ever. And where mistakes are made, they do need to get their house in order, and the BBC must uphold the highest standards, be accountable and correct errors quickly. But I will always stand up for a strong, independent BBC.
Davey.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is right that the BBC's independence and impartiality are absolutely crucial. That's why we must stop President Trump from undermining them. But President Trump's not the only one, Mr. Speaker. The last government spent years undermining the BBC's independence and impartiality. They put 2 Conservative cronies on the BBC board. One has had to resign, the other's still there, but he's been repeatedly accused of interfering in editorial decisions and staff appointments. Robbie Gibbs should have no role in appointing the next Director General. And given the Royal Charter gives the government the power to remove him, will the Prime Minister sack him now?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I certainly agree with the comment that the last government undermined the work of the BBC. They undermined pretty well everything they did in 14 years. Mr. Speaker, I'm not going to go into the individual runnings of the BBC. I am a strong supporter of the BBC in the terms I've already set out.
Don't puffy.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, this is Care Leavers Month, when we remember the resilience...
I can't... Is it 2 years or 3 years since my book, How They Broke Britain, came out? And finally, the role of Robbie Gibb at the BBC gets picked up at PMQs. More on that and the rest of it after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 17 minutes after 12 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Shall we do an apposite missing word round? I think we should. OK, see if we can work out what the missing word is in this, because it ties in with some of what we just heard at PMQs. Reform Council, and in this case it's not Kent, although nice to hear one of them pick... Who was it, Ed Davey or Keir Starmer, who'd clearly been listening to the programme earlier when they pointed out that the Kent County Council is indeed... It was Keir Starmer, is indeed a blueprint for what this country would look like if Reform were in charge, although not necessarily in the way that Nigel Farage intended when he described Kent County Council as a blueprint for what this country would look like if he was in charge. Reform Council doubles tax on second homes, despite blank. In fact, technically, blank blank. Do you know what that is? Reform Council doubles tax on second homes despite blank blank. Blank blanks or blank... Anyway, missing words. What do you think they are? Reform Council doubles tax on second homes despite blank blank. Natasha, excuse me for a moment. I have to talk to Keith. I've got a woke watch, mate. I haven't had a... How long since we had a woke? Have we still got the jingle? Can you get the jingle out of the crypt? And then we'll apply it shortly for a woke watch story, which rather magnificently appears in today's Daily Telegraph. I thought everyone had given up on that, but it's back once again, like a renegade master. When we found those notes, well, not you and me personally, but she left in a room somewhere, didn't she? Sort of Kemi Badenoch mantras and...
I am enough.
I am enough.
I'm a strong,
I am a
woman.
strong, confident woman. Did any of it say, stay calm, I am calm?
No, but I think that I would advise her to do so if I were advising her to try to be better at PMQs.
She was so calm for the first 2 or 3 questions that her effectiveness, admittedly from a very low start, but her effectiveness increases exponentially when she stays calm.
Yeah,
and by calm, I don't just mean unexcited. I mean deliberately and studiedly calm, as in not even getting a bit breathless, not rushing, not just. I thought she was great for the first 2 or 3 questions.
Yeah, I agree with her. I think it's definitely a better look for her when she lowers her tone, lowers her voice, and just asks quite a scathing question, as she did at the top, saying, do you agree with what one of your cabinet ministers said today, that there's a toxic culture in number 10 Downing Street? And again, I didn't think that she would go on to this. I didn't think that she would talk about the Westminster psychodrama, but equally, it's probably just something that is just too tempting at a time like this, when the Prime Minister is clearly feeling a bit weak. And obviously, looking back at what we've seen over the last 24 hours, if you were in number 10 Downing Street this afternoon, will you look back on those briefings that happened last night, where you're talking about a potential leadership challenge, talking about West Streeting? Will you look at Prime Minister's questions today and go, oh, yeah, absolutely, thought that was a great briefing, and
great
the Prime Minister came out fighting there. Did that work? Did that work to say we're a united team, as some people on the opposite benches are howling at you? And you've got quite a lot of Aggie Chambray texts in from the press gallery saying there are a few glum faces in this press gallery at the moment. Some of them look to be putting on a bit of a brave face. And that feels to me like that's not exactly a fantastic look to come out of Prime Minister's questions, with your top Prime Minister and his top team saying, we're all united, and pointedly...
Such an unnecessary episode, really.
Pointedly declining to say that you have full confidence in your top aide, Morgan McSweeney, as well.
And all handed to Kemi Badenoch, who, as you reminded us earlier, is much more likely to face a leadership challenge than Keir Starmer is in the near to middle distance, all handed to her on a silver platter.
Yeah, and it was clearly too tempting for her to avoid a swing.
Well, we both got that wrong.
Yeah, definitely. But, she's talking about feral MPs. She's talking about destabilising the market. She's obviously talking about what happened this morning with Wes Streeting, and obviously allies there pointing the finger at him as being the person most likely to try and launch a leadership challenge. There's a very different... it's hugely different to talk about Wes Streeting as a man who might take over from the Prime Minister. And those conversations, James, of course, are happening in the corridors of power around Westminster. It's a different thing to point the finger and say, this man could launch a leadership challenge to the Prime Minister within the next couple of days or weeks.
Well,
which I just don't think is going to happen.
But could it be true? Could it be true that they have got information that he's planning?
Yeah, I mean,
they must think it's true to brief people like Pippa Crerar at The Guardian, mustn't they?
Of course, and, in Pippa's report today, she's talking about the fact that they believe that there could be 40 MPs ready to put their names to a potential Wes Streeting challenge. That, I think, is totally for the birds. It's not like the Tories. You have to put your name to this stuff. You can't do it anonymously with a letter behind the scenes. That is just not going to happen. I think it's totally crazy.
It's a very strange episode, and probably of rather more interest to people like us than to the man on the Clapham omnibus, but it is nonetheless important because it is potentially fractures are appearing in the prime ministerial edifice. I have a very similar sense of humour to Jonathan in Deal, who writes in, when Kemi Badenoch said, "Not my words," just for a moment, James, I thought she was about to say, and indeed I would have given anything to hear her say, the words of Shakin' Stevens.
Not my words, Michael. The words of Shakin' Stevens.
It's made me and Jonathan laugh. Everyone else looks on in indulgent befuddlement. And then Ed David, well, do we need to talk more about, because as soon as she tried to move on to more substantive territory, the early start began to deflate slightly, I would say.
Yeah, I think she got a little bit excited when she was starting to talk about the unemployment figures, which arguably would have been my probably second or third choice for a topic for her to bring up. The unemployment figures reaching a high that we haven't seen since the pandemic, since lockdown. Equally, Keir Starmer had a ready reply saying unemployment under the Tories, an average of 5.5%. Now, that was, of course, after the financial crash, over 14 years, potentially not really comparable in those figures. She's saying, we left it a lot lower. But yes, obviously, as we go ahead of the budget, what is, of course, going to be on everybody's lips is how this budget is going to affect business, jobs and the economy, and whether Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves can actually get that growth that they keep promising us. And Keir Starmer, again, has a really strong story on this one and has a really, really strong response, talking about the stupid mistakes of Liz Truss, of the last Tory government. They were the ones that broke the economy. We're trying to rebuild it. And every time he manages to not go down on this.
And then Ed Davey, who objectively asked much more interesting questions than Kemi Badenoch did, although not necessarily tactically better in the interest of personal interest, but objectively much more interesting, starting with this ludicrous legal case that Trump is threatening to bring against the BBC. Of course, it's ludicrous in substantive and evidential terms. It's not necessarily ludicrous in actual terms, because we've seen American media organisations buckle and bend under threats that would almost certainly have been thrown out or defeated had they ever actually got to court. But if you're in the middle of a takeover that needs presidential approval or needs government approval, and the president comes along saying, you better look after me, you better give me something, otherwise you're going to lovely little takeover you got there, be a shame if something happened to it, then we've seen American media organisations bend over and reach for their wallet. The BBC unlikely to do so, but...
Well, they don't have a wallet to reach for, do they? Let's be honest, it's ours.
It's licence fees, payers' money that Donald Trump is seeking to steal or secure, depending on your perspective. Davey went in pretty hard on that. Starmer resisted the opportunity to be similarly robust, but he wasn't. Yeah. He didn't roll over.
No, and number 10 of in the past few days since this BBC story broke, tread quite a fine line between defending the BBC but equally not attacking Donald Trump for daring to attack the BBC. They are saying, of course, the BBC have made mistakes over what we've seen, but obviously everybody is asking those questions. What happens if Donald Trump pushes this to a court case? Who is going to pay, and are the BBC liable for that? What happens if the BBC gets slapped with a huge fine? Do the government then step in to help pay for that? There's a lot of questions there.
There are questions to which David Allen Green, the legal expert who, before he hung up his broadcasting enthusiasms, used to be an enormous adornment to this programme. He's written a brilliant blog about it. There's a couple actually on his Substack, and chief among the observations he has made is that there is precisely no evidential proof of harm caused to Donald Trump in any of even in the legal letter that Donald Trump's lawyers sent. They haven't been able to point to any evidence whatsoever of reputational harm.
Yeah, he's probably just taking a punt, isn't he? Let's be honest.
Probably, and you couldn't even watch the programme in the United States of America where he won the subsequent election. So quite how you'd be able to claim that it has done him any damage?
No.
When the first thing they do in court is play out the entire speech, stick Donald Trump in the dock, and ask him whether or not it's true that he won the 2020 election. At which point he either lies or abandons the lies that he's been telling ever since. But hey-ho, that's just me talking.
But he didn't get many answers out of the Prime Minister, I'm afraid, Ed Davey.
Because he's got to still walk that tightrope.
He has.
He can't, unfortunately, say any of the things that everybody knows to be true.
Exactly. And, calling on the Prime Minister to sack Robbie Gibb, the Conservative on the board of the BBC, I don't know if the Prime Minister has the power to do that. I don't believe that they do.
It's a prime ministerial appointment. Or a government appointment.
Yeah, I think obviously if there was that political pressure, there might be something you could do about it. I don't believe the Prime Minister has that power to sack people from the BBC, but it might be a culture secretary decision.
If it's an appointment, a government position. And I mean, it is absolutely obscene that a man knighted for services to the Conservative Party is lecturing our friends and colleagues at the BBC on journalistic impartiality. Lewis Goodall dealt with him best on social media a few years ago when the man who dares to lecture other people on impartiality took a swing at Lewis for reporting something entirely innocuous, and Lewis responded by saying, well, maybe if I'm as impartial as you, one day I'll get a knighthood.
Bless.
But there we are. And it turns out this bloke Prescott as well is a lobbyist who is in the pay of, or his company at least, is in the pay of many of the tech companies that are very, very closely linked to Donald Trump and Donald Trump's administration. So colour me shocked. Imagine if any of this was happening on the other side of the political divide. The left-wing equivalent of Robbie Gibb was still trying to pull strings at the BBC. You would have a rather different complexion on much of the coverage. But nice to see Ed Davey recognising the reality that some of us have been screaming about for years.
Yeah, and fair to say, press freedom is a threat in the United States from the Donald Trump administration.
Gone, mate.
And there's
not under threat. It's disappeared.
And there is what does that happen if that comes here? There are totally questions there.
Indeed.
Editorial decision over this, but all Keir Starmer could say is that he's a strong supporter of the BBC. He can't guarantee that the government might not help him out. But yes, it feels a bit weak. The government don't clearly want to swing on this.
Everyone wants it to go ahead except Donald Trump's people, I imagine, who are just hoping for another successful shakedown of a big media company. How much does it cost to make you go away? Which is, of course, how protection rackets have operated since.
And also, the BBC don't want to drag this out into the court, I imagine. I imagine they don't want to see that.
I wish they would.
I'm sure there are.
Why not make a programme out of it?
Yeah.
It's sensational. Speaking of programmes, Nigel Farage has announced that he is boycotting the BBC.
I wonder why.
Yeah, well, I'm going to make a bet with you. I bet he doesn't.
As in, he bet he doesn't do the boycott the programme? Or?
No, I bet he's back on the BBC by tea time tomorrow.
Well, he said he's boycotting this programme that Laura Kuenssberg is making with the Reform Party on the rise of the Reform Party.
So he'll still be doing Question Time, will he?
I imagine
he'll still be on Laura Kuenssberg's Sunday morning programme. So what exactly is the point that he's making?
I think he's making the point that I side with Donald Trump over the BBC row, and that's exactly the message that he likes
enough to actually boycott the BBC.
Well,
although fair play to him if he does. I will eat a slice of humble pie if Nigel Farage promises today never to appear on the BBC again in protest at the 9-second.
I don't think he has. I don't think he has, and I don't think he will.
Well, anyway, on the subject of Nigel Farage, Reform Council doubles tax on second homes despite blank. Anybody? Farage claims. So this is a council that is doubling the council tax on second homes, despite Nigel Farage's well-documented support for a Daily Telegraph campaign pledging or indeed opposing the government policy to allow councils to increase council tax on second homes. The whole thing, he said in May, is madness. Whatever the downsides of increased house prices, these people bring a lot of money into these areas, he said when supporting the Daily Telegraph's campaign to oppose the government's policy to let councils increase council taxes on second homes. How surprised would you be if he claimed today that he never said that at all and it was all a massive misquote? At a scale of 1 to 10, how surprised would you be that when he is caught once again in the horns of an epic hypocrisy, yet more evidence of either the the right hand not knowing what the far right hand is doing within his organisation, he would claim that he never said it in the first place. He does it all the time. He did it with Vladimir Putin. Do you remember? He said, I never said that I admired Vladimir Putin. So David Dimbleby played in the clip of him saying, the politician I admire most is Vladimir Putin. You might call that lying. I'm just asking questions. But yes, he has now claimed that he was misquoted by the Daily Telegraph, something that he had failed to point out every day since May, and that he is now denying that he ever called for the council tax premium to be removed, despite supporting a national newspaper campaign calling for the council tax premium to be removed. If you can't trust him, who can you trust, eh? Honestly. It is 12:31. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Simon Marks will be with us from 12:45. After this, the author of a book that somewhat, is it apposite? Is that the right word to use? Conveniently? It's a book about the past in America, a historical event, a conspiracy theory of old, which has extraordinary resonance for much of the current affairs diet that we've been consuming today. So you can meet him after the headlines with Tim Humphrey.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:35, and I don't know what example you would rather pluck from the current discourse. I mean, this obsession with London being some sort of hellhole or no-go zone, the way in which conspiracy theories or mythologies can take hold of a population and end up being believed on a level that, even sometimes perhaps the people who came up with the original disinformation can't quite get their heads around how successful it has been. I'm fascinated by two things. I'm fascinated by the speed with which a lie can get halfway around the world before it's got its trousers on. And I'm fascinated also by the process under which it happens. And we live in an era, of course, where these things are going to be much, much more commonplace and potentially much more dangerous. Disinformation, AI, social media, conspiracy theories, deep fakes that are absolutely every bit as convincing as reality, but completely invented. It's not the technology. This is the point I'm trying to make. It's not the technology that explains the existence of all these things. Is it the credulity of the population? Phil Tinline has written a book about a hoax that dates back to, I think, 1967, that speaks to a lot of the themes that are very front and centre in public discourse today. Report from Iron Mountain even sucked the White House in back in the day.
It did. So this is a story that kicks off in 1966 when the Vietnam War is getting going and it suddenly looks like peace might break out. And a strange thing happens on Wall Street. Instead of shares going up because everyone's pleased, they dip. This is called a peace scare. And there's 3 young satirists sitting on Fifth Avenue watching this happen, thinking, hang on a second, this is a bit weird. And so they think, we can do something with this. We'll make up the story of a completely fake government report which scopes out what would happen to America if permanent global peace broke out. The joke being, it would wreck society, it would destroy the economy, and you'd have to do things like reintroduce slavery, get young men to play blood games, introduce eugenics, make up fake alien scares and poison the environment in order to replace the beneficial effects of war to control the population. So this is published by a larky publishers, serious publishers. They publish James Baldwin, but they publish it as though it's real. They don't tell their sales staff, and so it makes front page of the New York Times saying this appears to be real. They phone the White House. The White House don't know. They say they'll investigate. Got the memos going up to the president, and this rolls on into this great sort of hullabaloo, and they keep quiet and let it all happen because what they want to do is to try to get people to think for a second about what they're being told and how mad it is.
Satire in its purest form.
Precisely.
Because it sounds like something The Onion might have come up with, albeit on a grander, slightly grander scale than they ever managed. And it was a special study group recruited by the Kennedy administration to work out what would happen.
Yeah, there's a whole story about that. They meet in a bunker at a place called Iron Mountain, and they meet all over the country, and they take 3 years over this thing, and it's all very sort of stressful, and then it's leaked. And when it comes out, the great economist J.K. Galbraith, who's actually been involved in coming up with the hoax, writes a review suggesting that he was involved but had to say no to joining the committee. Anyway, what happens in the end is that they 5 years later they say what's really been going on. After the Pentagon Papers come out, they kind of think that reality has trumped satire. But
just remind people what was in the Pentagon.
So the Pentagon Papers is basically a revelation of loads of documents in the early 70s that
this was real.
Yeah, this is real. This is real. That the government had been lying to the public about Vietnam, and this is one reason it lands, right? Because as you said, it's not just technology. There's a TV program made partly about this report where the host says, we've never had such an avalanche of information, so little of it believed or believable.
Oh, wow.
It's in 1967, right? You've got the phrase credibility gap about the government's way of talking being used so often that there's a board game invented called credibility gap. Anyway, this all eventually kind of comes out in 1972, and then the hoax disappears because it's essentially a story about America having so much money it doesn't know what to do with it, so it's burning it in Vietnam. And the writer who wrote the actual report really wants to see it republished. He tries and tries, can't get it republished until he discovers in 1990 it has been republished. It's been republished by fascists who think it's real. And some of them still do. So this informs the Oliver Stone movie JFK and the militia movement. There's a whole other hoax invented which informs QAnon, etc. And it just ramifies and ramifies. As you say, the lie goes halfway around the world.
And does it also speak slightly to the support for the anti-war elements of the current far right in America? You know, the idea that they don't want to be involved in foreign wars.
Yeah, well, the reason it makes sense to me that it shifts from a left-wing satire to a right-wing conspiracy theory is both sides, not without reason, have some serious suspicions about the centre of power, the centre of the political spectrum. It's just you can have that based on evidence or you can have it based on monster scare stories. So you can see this happen again and again with phrases like military-industrial complex on the left or deep state on the right. They both become kind of words for the kind of the dark, shadowy cabal, but that's not how they start off at all. So yeah, there's a shared sort of fear of the power of the central state.
I don't want to gloss over that JFK relevance, because Oliver Stone is one of those people who sort of went from hero to something rather different in quite a spectacularly short period of time. I'm thinking of The Doors to JFK.
Right.
JFK, the movie repeated actual elements of the hoax.
Yeah.
As reasons for Kennedy's assassination.
Right, so you remember that great big scene in the middle where Mr. Garrison needs to find out why, not how Mr. Garrison, but why. The Donald Sutherland character who does this 18-minute monologue with this absolutely spectacular bit of archive footage.
God save us from people who do 18-minute monologues. That's just unbearable.
Well, Kevin Costner gets a word in edgeways here and there, but this guy is presented as like the movie's Deep Throat, right?
Yeah.
He appears out of nowhere. He marches Kevin Costner as the investigating DA along the Mall in Washington and explains the reasoning behind what happens in the secret state. Now, that guy had worked in the Pentagon. The guy it's based on a real character called Colonel Leroy Fletcher Prouty, who had worked in the Pentagon at the time, but in the years since had become more and more of a conspiracy theorist. And he is the person who had given the far right the copy of the report, which they then republished as though it was real. And there's a line at the end where he says, "The organising principle of society, Mr. Garrison, is for war." And this comes directly from the report because, and we know this because Pruti wrote 19 articles for Freedom, the investigative magazine of the Church of Scientology, which ran from 1985 to 1987. That's why Stone gets in touch with him. And the elements of the speech are, reflected exactly from how he quotes the hoax in the Scientologist investigative journal.
I mean, you can't make it up, obviously, even though the original authors of the report did, because it even it ends up being used in the same breath as the arguably the most notorious anti-Semitic forgery of all time, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion in some spaces, and it spawns a sequel, as it were, as well, a secondary hoax, or doesn't spawn it, but Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars becomes a compounding element of this,
exactly.
which is something Alex Jones talks about a lot.
That's right.
InfoWars,
particularly
another Trump ally and friend.
Yeah. And Q of QAnon fame will talk about the Silent War. Neil Oliver has mentioned it on GB News.
Oh, yes.
Drawing on material that comes via David Icke, who talks about it a lot in his books, along, obviously,
and
with the lizards.
The people responsible for it have, I mean, certainly the original one, have said it was a hoax, and yet still it continues to hold people in thrall who are conspiracy theorists.
Right, because once you've got this idea of the cabal in your head, anything like that, as we know from conspiracy theory more generally, you can fit in. So one person I saw online even said that the reason why the guy who wrote it then wrote a novel later was sheep dipping. It was a cover story. But my favourite version of this is that the great civil rights campaigner and comedian Dick Gregory, a very, very brave man, but also a massive JFK conspiracy theorist, is on the phone one day in the 1980s to a fellow JFK conspiracy theorist, a guy called Ralph Sherman, who happens to be going out with the daughter of the guy who wrote this report, and starts talking about Report from Iron Mountain. And Ralph says, no, it was made up. I'm sitting next to his daughter. And Dick Gregory says, no, he has to say that to the CIA or kill him.
That's what happens, isn't it? Oh, this is brilliant. And people should read it. Seriously, now. Ghosts of Iron Mountain, the hoax that duped America and its sinister legacy. I'm always intrigued, Phil, by lead times on publication. Presumably this got commissioned before Donald Trump won the election.
Yeah, I finished writing it at the start of last year.
So events have been rather, for you at least, felicitous in bringing a lot of this kind of stuff very much back to the forefront.
I mean, I don't want to say that as I watched the election, the little Graham Greene sliver of ice in my heart was tingling happily, but I think some of this stuff would have been around if Kamala Harris had won. I think we'd have a howl round of conspiracy theories from a different direction. But it has been really striking how much has been talked about hoaxes. And my favourite example of this was just over the weekend. Donald Trump retweeted a satire as though it was real.
He did indeed.
So,
that was about President Obama getting a commission on healthcare.
40 million quid's worth of taxpayers' money since 2010, and the website which published this says this is satire, it's not a lie, it's fiction, anyone who believes it has to have their head examined.
And then Donald Trump tweeted in a fashion that suggests he believed it. The book is out now. Very briefly, because I've got Simon Marks waiting on the other side of the break. Where did the idea come? When did you think, good God, there's a book in this?
Well, I was hunting around for stuff like you do on a Saturday afternoon about the military-industrial complex, and I found 3 different references to it in 3 different political books from America in the 60s. One said it was real, one said it was fake.
Oh, amazing.
One wasn't sure, and I thought, oh, hang on.
Hello. Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, just amazing. Great stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Phil Tinline. And the book is out now in hardback on both sides of the Atlantic, because we're quite popular on YouTube now in the States, Phil, so we should be able to flog a few books for you over there as well. Ghosts of Iron Mountain, the hoax that duped America and its sinister legacy. It's published by Head of Zeus.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:48. Just a quick story for you from the newspapers. Here you go. The Conservative 1922 committee, composed of backbench MPs, met privately last night to consider allegations that left-wing political bias has crept into BBC programmes. So little importance is attached to the allegations at Westminster that the meeting was attended by a mere handful of members. The few who were there heard Captain Maul Ramsey, Conservative MP for South Midlothian, make the point that both news and talks are coloured by left-wing prejudice. But as many left-wing MPs take the view that if anything, news and talks show signs of right influence, the BBC Red Bias campaign may shortly cease. That's in February of 1937. Just by way of illustration of how little or how much things change. And the MP quoted there, Captain Archibald Maul Ramsey, very, very, very passionate critic of the BBC's left-wing bias, was so pro-Nazi that by the time war broke out, Churchill had him interned. All right, just a little word of caution for people there before we turn to Simon Marks in Washington, D.C. to get the lay of the land over there. And we have to start, I suppose, with the prospect of £1 billion worth. I should do that again in the style of Dr. Evil. £1 billion worth of licence fee payers' money making its way into Donald Trump's trews.
I keep wondering, James, why he selected the 1 billion figure. And I think it might be because it's alliterative. Yes. I think it's because it's the BBC. I think if it was MBC, he'd have gone with some millions. But look, let's be absolutely clear about this, OK?
What if it was Fox?
There are... Sorry, I'm not going there. Let's be absolutely clear about this, OK? There are no serious legal analysts in the United States that think this threatened lawsuit by Donald Trump has a snowball's chance of success in Florida. And let's look at the track record of Donald Trump's numerous threats to take out lawsuits, many of which, of course, never materialize, but some do. Let's take a look just in the last few weeks. He was going after Bob Woodward, the veteran Watergate journalist of the Washington Post, for $50 million over Mr. Woodward's 2022 book Rage. That was thrown out by a judge who, in the process of throwing that lawsuit out, reminded Donald Trump's lawyers that, and this is a quote, litigation is not a game. If we go back to September, the New York Times was facing a $15 billion lawsuit from the president over claims that the paper had defamed him by daring to question his success in the business world. Where did Donald Trump bring that lawsuit? You got it, in the Sunshine State of Florida, which is exactly where he's threatening to bring this lawsuit against the BBC. Judge Stephen Merriday in Florida criticised the attempted legal action, in his judgment dismissing it. He called the legal action tedious and burdensome and often repetitive. He reminded the president that a complaint is not a public forum for vituperation and invective, nor a megaphone for public relations or a podium for a passionate oration at a political rally. So when media organisations push back against these threatened lawsuits, there's a strong possibility that they win, particularly if the lawsuits being brought in Florida, covered by the First Amendment guarantees in the American Constitution that protect freedom of speech. And also, by the way, the president would have to prove that there were people in Florida so aggrieved by that clumsy edit in the Panorama documentary that they were in some fashion disadvantaged by it. Now, we know from the BBC that back in October of last year, they didn't even receive a phone call complaining about the documentary from Angry of Manchester. So the chances that they were receiving any phone calls from viewers in Florida seems extremely slim. So, I think there is a real case to underscore that no licence payer money is going to be flowing into Donald Trump's coffers anytime soon, regardless of whether he actually goes ahead with this lawsuit or not.
Which is itself probably unlikely, but we will see. I mean, in an objective universe, the other story breaking today is immeasurably more important. The United Kingdom, even as it attempts, of course, to keep Trump sweet in so many other ways, is pausing intelligence sharing with the United States because, well, they keep killing people without any evidence for the what would be extrajudicial or illegal murders of people in boats between Venezuela and the States.
That's the key point. Without any legal justification whatsoever, 76 people now killed summarily by the United States in waterborne speedboats that have been blown out of the water, in the waters of the Caribbean, in the waters of the Pacific. We have to take it on trust that the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, is telling the truth when he says that these people were drug traffickers, that they were carrying substantial cargoes of drugs towards American shores. The reason we have to take it on truth is because the Pentagon, the Department of War, the White House won't provide any evidence
but they could easily
support the claims.
They could share the proof they have. That wouldn't be very difficult. It wouldn't involve any great compromise of secrecy or anything like that.
No, absolutely not. And not only that they could come up with some sort of legal justification for what they're doing. They don't even attempt to answer in the affirmative the question about whether this is legal under any international law. So I think the British government has clearly got very cold feet over intelligence sharing that might be used by the Trump administration in this extrajudicial campaign, especially with Donald Trump now positioning military forces off the coast of Venezuela, threatening to launch airstrikes on Venezuelan soil. Were any intelligence that the British government or other Five Eyes partners had provided to the United States to be used in those military assaults, they might find themselves culpable for any legal action that results from this, or claims for compensation from the families of those people killed.
All of which makes it all the more remarkable and possibly grimly predictable that the Democrats have managed to snatch a form of defeat from the jaws of last week's extraordinary victories.
I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. So for those people that haven't been following this over the last 3 days, 8 Democrats decided to cross the aisle and vote with Republicans in the United States Senate to bring the government shutdown to a close, and in doing so capitulated to basically a key demand of Donald Trump. The Democrats wanted government subsidies for healthcare coverage to be extended in any funding measure. You know, the price of healthcare here is a massive issue. There are an estimated 4 million people relying on Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, and their fees for that are subsidized by the government. The Republicans have steadfastly refused to extend those subsidies. This was the line over which Democrats were not going to walk until the weekend, when those 8 Democrat senators in the Senate caved. They've only been promised a vote on whether those healthcare subsidies should be extended next month, and indeed only a vote in the Senate, not a vote in the House of Representatives, and they will clearly lose that vote in the Senate. So the grassroots of the party, particularly the progressive left, but I think also, the contagion is now spreading much further than that, going absolutely bananas and saying, look, a week ago we were daring to dream of vanquishing Donald Trump and the Republicans after those off-year elections, and now we are facing a lengthy internecine civil war for control of the party. It's a real mess.
Well, it is indeed. It's hard to know where to start or where to end, but once again, Simon, you've not only brought us in on time, but you've steered us through the choppiest of waters. We'll speak soon, no doubt, about some of those stories and others. It's a failure of leadership as well as anything else, which the Democrats seem to be turning into something of an art form at the moment. I want to find, I've flipping lost it. There's a brilliant, I mentioned to you David Allen Green, the legal blogger who was working on the case that Simon was just discussing, the fact that the BBC don't really have a leg to stand on. He's now written a suggested version that they could send back to Donald Trump's legal team, and it contains a line which I haven't got in front of me, so I'm going to do it from memory and get it a little bit wrong. But it says, you mentioned 3 times in your letter that the president has suffered reputational harm without providing any evidence of that reputational harm. You mentioned it 3 times, presumably on the Beetlejuice principle, that if you say something 3 times, you make it appear. That's why we love David Allen Green, and that's why we wish he hadn't decided to stop contributing to broadcast outlets like this one and confine himself instead to his absolutely splendid and highly recommended Substack. That's it from me for another day. You can listen to it all again if you want, or just bits of it or none of it, on Global Player or the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on all the top stories and opinions, put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio so you can clarify exactly how many P's there were in that little episode earlier that you won't know anything about unless you were listening at the time. And there's also a range of podcasts, including James O'Brien Daily and Full Disclosure, my long-form interview project. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
I like that Beetlejuice theory.
James O'Brien on LBC.